My life was a lie. For 6 long years, I cared for my paralyzed wife, believing tragedy had struck our home naturally. But a routine hospital visit changed everything when the doctor gave me a chilling order. Call the police. The truth was more twisted than I could ever have imagined. My own son and his wife were not just ungrateful, they were monsters. And I was the only thing standing between them and a $2 million payout. I am Moses King, 71 years old. For the last 6 years, I have been a nurse, a servant, and a ghost in my own home, watching my wife, Etta, fade away in a wheelchair. But today started like any other Tuesday, with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my son, Tyrell, screaming into his cell phone in the hospital hallway. I need that extension, Tony. I said I would get you the money. Do not come to my house. Do you hear me? I sat in the plastic chair, holding Ida's limp hand, pretending not to hear Tyrell's desperation. He was 35 years old, a grown man who still thought shouting made him sound important. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but I knew the pockets were empty. Tyrell had been chasing get-rich-quick schemes since he dropped out of college, and judging by the sweat on his forehead, this latest gamble had gone bad. Beside me stood Paige, my daughter-in-law. She checked her gold watch for the 5th time in 3 minutes, tapping her manicured nails against her arm. She was a real estate agent, specifically for luxury homes, or so she claimed. She was beautiful in a cold, sharp way, like a diamond that could cut glass. She looked down at Ada, not with compassion, but with the annoyance one might feel for a stain on a new rug. Moses, how much longer is this going to take? Paige snapped, her blue eyes narrowing. We have the early birthday party scheduled for 4. I cannot be late to receive the guests. The caterers are already setting up at the house. I tightened my grip on Ida's hand. She did not squeeze back. She never did, not since the stroke took her away from me 6 years ago. She just stared blankly ahead, her mouth slightly open, a small line of drool forming at the corner. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a handkerchief, gently wiping her face. Ada was a proud woman once, the kind who would not leave the house without her hat and gloves. Seeing her like this never stopped hurting. The doctor will be here soon, Paige, I said, my voice low and steady. I spent 40 years as a logistics foreman, running warehouses full of rough men and heavy machinery. I learned a long time ago that speaking softly forces people to lean in to listen. But Paige did not lean in. She rolled her eyes. This is ridiculous. It's just a routine checkup. Why, Dr. Evans insisted we come in person instead of doing a telehealth call is beyond me. She pulled out her phone, probably to check her listings, or maybe to ignore the fact that her husband was still arguing with a loan shark 10 feet away. The door opened, and Dr. Evans stepped in. He was young, maybe 40, new to the practice, taking over after old Dr. Miller retired. Usually he had a firm handshake and a quick smile, but today he looked pale. His lab coat seemed heavy on his shoulders, and he was sweating despite the air conditioning being cranked up high. Mr. King, Tyrell, Paige. Good to see you, Doctor, Evans said, but he did not look good. He looked terrified. He glanced at Ida in the wheelchair, then at me, then quickly shifted his gaze to the clipboard in his hands. Well, Doctor, Paige cut in, stepping forward, blocking his view of me. Is she fine? Can we go? We are on a very tight schedule today. Doctor. Evans swallowed hard. I need to run a few more reflex tests on Mrs. King. It has been a while since her last full neurological workup. I would like to do this in the private exam room, just me and the patient to minimize distractions. No, Paige said instantly. The word came out sharp, like a whip crack. She stepped between the doctor and Ada, crossing her arms. We do not have time for that. And besides, we have medical power of attorney. We stay with her. She gets agitated when she is alone with strangers. That was a lie. Ada did not get agitated. She did not get anything. She was a shell. But I saw the way Paige's jaw set. She was hiding something. Usually I would not argue. I would just want to get Etta home where she was comfortable. But today, something in Dr. Evans' eyes stopped me. He looked desperate, pleading. It will only take 10 minutes, Mrs. King, Dr. Evans said, his voice trembling slightly. Please, it is protocol. Tyrell walked back into the waiting area, shoving his phone into his pocket. He looked flushed and angry. What is the holdup? Let's go. Mom needs to rest. Getting ready for the party is going to be exhausting enough. The doctor wants to take her to the back alone, Paige said, looking at Tyrell meaningfully. We don't have time for nonsense. Tyrell grabbed the wheelchair handles. Doctor. Evans stepped forward, his hand raised. Wait, please. I just need to check her pupils and her muscle tone in her legs. I noticed some irregularities in her blood work from last week. Irregularities? Tyrell froze, his hands on the wheelchair. What kind of irregularities? Is she dying? For a second, I saw a flash of what looked like hope on my son's face. It made my stomach turn. No, not dying, doctor, Evans said quickly. Just changes. Look, I really need to do this properly. Paige let out a huff of frustration. This is harassment, doctor. If you do not sign her release papers right now, I will have our lawyer on the phone before you can blink. We are taking her home. Tyrell, push. Tyrell started to push the chair, ignoring the doctor. Doctor. Evans looked at me, and for a split second our eyes locked. I saw fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He realized he could not stop them, not without causing a scene that might get the police involved for the wrong reasons. And clearly he was afraid of something specific. Wait, I said, standing up, my knees popping. I was 71, but I was still a big man. I blocked Tyrell's path. Let the doctor finish his checkup, Tyrell. It is for your mother. Dad, move, Tyrell snapped, using his shoulder to nudge me aside. We are leaving. Doctor. Evans moved quickly. As Tyrell maneuvered the wheelchair around me, the doctor stepped in close, as if to help untangle the wheel from the chair leg. Mr. King, your collar is twisted. Let me fix that for you. It was an odd thing to say. My clothes were always neat. Ada used to iron them for me every Sunday, and since she got sick, I ironed them myself out of respect for her memory. But before I could step back, Doctor, Evans' hand brushed against my chest. He smoothed my lapel, but I felt it, the distinct crinkle of paper being shoved into my breast pocket. His hand lingered for just a second, pressing the paper down. Take care of her, Moses, Doctor, Evans whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of Paige complaining about the parking validation. Take very good care of her. Then he stepped back, his hands raised in surrender. Fine, take her, but bring her back next week. I insist. Paige did not even answer. She was already marching toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the linoleum. Tyrell pushed Ada past me, not even looking me in the eye. Come on, Dad. Stop stalling. We have to go. I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Doctor. Evans turned and walked back into his office, closing the door firmly. He did not look back. I followed my family to the elevator. The ride down to the parking garage was silent, except for Tyrell's heavy breathing and Paige tapping on her phone. I felt the paper burning through my jacket. What was it? A prescription? A referral? Why all the secrecy? We got to the van, a modified vehicle I had bought with my retirement savings to transport Ida. Tyrell loaded her in, roughly buckling the straps without checking if they were pinching her arm. Watch her arm, son, I said gently, reaching out to adjust the strap. She is fine, Dad. Stop hovering, Tyrell snapped, slamming the door shut. Get in the front. Paige is driving. I climbed into the passenger seat. The drive home was tense. Paige drove aggressively, weaving through traffic while talking on the phone to the caterers. Tyrell stared out the window, biting his fingernails, a habit he had since he was a boy whenever he was guilty of something. When we finally pulled into the driveway of the big house I had bought 30 years ago, the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary, I felt a wave of nausea. The lawn was covered in signs. Open house. Welcome. Celebrating 70 years. Paige had turned my wife's birthday into a networking event for her real estate clients. Go get Mom settled, Dad, Tyrell said, getting out. Paige and I have to get changed for the guests. They left me alone with Ada in the driveway. I unlocked the wheelchair and lowered the ramp, pushing my wife toward the front door. The afternoon sun was hot, but I felt cold inside. I pushed Ada into the hallway, parked her in front of the window where she liked the light, and kissed her forehead. I'll be right back, honey, I whispered. I have to use the bathroom. I walked into the small powder room on the first floor and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely reach into my pocket. I pulled out the small folded piece of paper. It was a page torn from a prescription pad. The handwriting was hurried, scrawled in blue ink. I unfolded it and read the message 3 times because my brain refused to accept the words the first time. Mr. King, do not trust them. Do not give her the medication they provide. Run. Call the police immediately. I found high concentrations of pancuronium in her blood work. That is a paralytic agent used for lethal injections or intubation. She is not paralyzed from the stroke. She is being chemically restrained. She can feel everything, but she cannot move. Get her out now. I leaned back against the sink, gasping for air. The room spun. Pancuronium, paralytic. She can feel everything. I looked at myself in the mirror, an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. For 6 years I had fed her, bathed her, changed her diapers, and read to her, thinking she was gone, thinking her mind was damaged. But she was there. She was trapped inside her own body, screaming for help, and I had not heard her. Tyrell, Paige, my son and his wife, they were not just bad children, they were monsters. They had been poisoning her, keeping her frozen like a living doll for 6 years. Why? Money. It had to be money. I heard a knock on the door. Dad, come on. Guests are arriving, Tyrell called out, his voice cheerful now, the mask back in place. I stared at the note. Then I tore it into tiny pieces and flushed it down the toilet. I washed my face with cold water, staring at the man in the mirror. The tired, sad old man was gone, replaced by something else, something harder, something dangerous. I unlocked the door and stepped out. I'm coming, son, I called out, my voice steady. I'm coming. I walked into the living room where Paige was directing the caterers. She smiled at me, a shark baring its teeth. There you are. Go put on your nice suit, Moses. We want everyone to see what a happy family we are. I really looked at her for the first time in years. I did not see my daughter-in-law anymore. I saw the enemy, and she had no idea that the war had just begun. I went to my room and changed, but I did not stay there. I cracked my door open and watched the guests arrive. They were not our friends or neighbors from church. They were sharks in Italian suits and women with plastic smiles holding glasses of champagne. They walked through my living room, touching my furniture, judging the crown molding, and talking about square footage. I slipped out into the hallway, moving with the quiet tread of a man who had spent years walking softly so as not to wake a sick wife. I mingled with the crowd, pretending to be a senile old uncle, sipping a glass of water and listening. Nice layout, one man said, tapping the wall. Knocking it down would open up the space, though. Yeah, but the location is prime, another replied. You could flip this for double if you gut the kitchen. My blood boiled. This was my home. Every scratch on the floorboards had a story. Every dent in the wall was a memory of Tyrell playing ball inside when it rained. And now these vultures were planning to gut it. I saw Paige near the fireplace, holding court with a tall man in a gray suit who looked like he owned half the city. I drifted closer, leaning against a pillar, pretending to admire a painting. So, Paige, the man asked, swirling his drink, what is the timeline on possession? The market is hot right now, but I can't wait 6 months. Paige laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Do not worry about that, Michael. The situation is very fluid. My in-laws are in a very fragile state. Frankly, we expect the property to be vacant by next month at the latest. The old man is losing his mind, and the mother, well, she is on her last legs. I gripped my water glass so hard I thought it would shatter. Vacant by next month. She was not just predicting our deaths, she was scheduling them. We are moving them to a facility as soon as the paperwork clears, Paige continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Honestly, it is a mercy. They have no quality of life left. I had heard enough. I needed to get to Ida. I needed to make sure she was safe right now. I pushed through the crowd of strangers who looked through me like I was a ghost and headed for the master bedroom. The door was closed but not latched. I pushed it open slowly, expecting to see Ada alone or maybe a nurse. But what I saw stopped my heart. Tyrell was standing over Ada's bed, his back to me. He was holding an IV bag, the nutrient solution that kept my wife alive. But in his other hand, he held a syringe filled with a thick yellow liquid. He was injecting it directly into the port on the IV line. My instinct was to roar, to rush him and tackle him to the ground. But the doctor's note flashed in my mind. Call the police. Run. Do not trust them. If I attacked him now with a house full of witnesses, Paige would twist it. She would say I had snapped, that I was attacking my son. She would have me committed tonight, and Ada would be dead by morning. I forced my feet to shuffle. I forced my breathing to sound ragged and loud. Tyrell spun around, hiding the syringe behind his back, his eyes wide with panic. Dad, he stammered. What are you doing in here? I blinked my eyes, trying to look confused and harmless. Looking for Ida, I mumbled, letting my voice tremble. I thought I heard her calling me. Tyrell let out a breath, his shoulders relaxing. He stepped away from the IV bag, slipping the syringe into his pocket. Mom cannot call anyone, Dad. She cannot speak. Remember? You are hearing things again. Look, you need to go back to the party. Paige is looking for you. I looked at the IV bag. The yellow liquid was swirling, mixing with the clear saline dripping down toward my wife's arm. Poison. Pancuronium? What are you giving her, son? I asked, pointing a shaking finger at the bag. It looks different. Tyrell's laugh was nervous, high-pitched. Just vitamins, Dad. The doctor said she needs a boost for her brain to help her wake up. It is new stuff. Very expensive. Vitamins. A lie. A clumsy, stupid lie from a man who had never cared about anyone but himself. I looked at Ada. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. One pupil slightly larger than the other. She was in there trapped, terrified, and her own son was poisoning her right in front of me. That is good, son, I said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. You are a good boy, taking care of your mother. Tyrell smirked, the arrogance returning. Yeah, sure, Dad. Go on now. Let Mom rest. I turned and walked out of the room, my legs feeling heavy as lead. I heard Tyrell lock the door behind me. I walked back into the noise of the party, the laughter of the investors, the clinking of glasses sounding like a funeral dirge. I went to the kitchen and poured my water down the sink, replacing it with tap water to cool my burning face. I knew what I had to do. I could not save her tonight, not with the house full of people and Tyrell guarding the door. But I knew something Tyrell did not know. I knew logistics. I knew how to manage inventory, how to swap shipments, how to make things disappear and reappear where they were supposed to be. My son thought I was a senile old man who ironed his shirts and watched TV. He forgot that I spent 40 years managing the flow of millions of dollars of goods. He forgot that I knew how to spot a thief and how to set a trap. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 7 p.m. The party would end soon. And tonight, while they slept, the old man they dismissed was going to go to work. I was not just Moses King, the retired foreman, anymore. I was a husband protecting his wife. And God help anyone who got in my way. Because that yellow liquid in the IV bag was not just poison, it was a declaration of war. The house was silent, but it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Earlier that evening, Paige had walked into the living room with a steaming mug of herbal tea. Here, Moses, she had said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. Drink this. It will help you sleep. You look so tired. I had taken the mug with a trembling hand, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. Thank you, Paige. You are too kind. I walked to my bedroom, the room I used to share with Ada before they moved her downstairs to the guest room for convenience. As soon as the door clicked shut, I poured the tea into the potted fern by the window. I was not tired. I was wired with adrenaline and terror. I knew that tea was laced with something, just like Ada's IV bag. They needed me asleep. They needed me out of the way so they could continue their slow execution of my wife. I waited. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the red numbers on the alarm clock change. 11, 12, 2. At 2:15 inches the morning, I stood up. My knees popped and my back ached, but I pushed the pain aside. I was not 71 years old tonight. I was a man on a mission. I opened my door an inch. The hallway was dark. The only light came from the street lamps filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long, skeletal shadows on the floor. I stepped out into the hall, moving with the silent tread I had perfected over 40 years of walking warehouse floors. I needed to get into my old office, the room at the end of the hall that Tyrell had claimed for himself 5 years ago. He called it his strategy room, where he supposedly ran his business empire. I knew it was where he played video games and ignored his responsibilities. I reached the door and turned the knob. Locked. Of course, it was locked. Tyrell was lazy, but he was paranoid. He kept his failures hidden behind locked doors. But he forgot one thing. I built this house. I laid the floorboards. I hung the doors. And I knew that the locking mechanism on this particular door was old. I reached up to the top of the door frame. My fingers brushed against dust, and then metal the emergency key. I had put it there 20 years ago when Tyrell was a teenager and used to lock himself in to skip homework. He had never found it. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for a door to open or a voice to call out. Silence. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The smell hit me first: stale smoke, cheap energy drinks, and the underlying musk of desperation. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket, shielding the beam with my fingers. The beam swept across the room. My beautiful mahogany desk, the one I had bought when I got my promotion to foreman, was covered in trash. Betting slips, fast food wrappers, empty beer bottles. It was a desecration. I was not here to clean up his mess. I was here to find the truth. I tried the drawers. The top ones were open, filled with useless junk. But the bottom drawer, the deep file drawer, was locked. I looked around for something to pry it open. I saw a letter opener on the desk, a heavy brass one that Ada had given me for our 25th anniversary. I grabbed it. I jammed the tip into the gap between the drawer and the frame. I leveraged my weight against it. Wood splintered. The lock groaned with a sharp crack. The drawer popped open. It was stuffed with papers. I started sifting through them, my heart hammering against my ribs. The first layer was financial ruin, bank notices, final warnings, foreclosure threats. I picked up a letter from the bank, dated 2 weeks ago, a notice of default on a second mortgage. A second mortgage on my house. Tyrell had forged my signature. He had leveraged the home I owned free and clear to pay for his gambling debts. The amount was staggering. $300,000. My hands shook as I put it aside. I dug deeper. There were letters from loan sharks, nasty things with veiled threats about broken kneecaps and accidents. Tyrell was drowning. He was not just broke. He was a dead man walking unless he came up with a lot of money very soon. And then I saw a blue folder at the very bottom of the stack. It looked pristine compared to the crumpled notices. I pulled it out and opened it. It was a life insurance policy. Policyholder: Ada King. Beneficiary: Tyrell King. Coverage amount: $2 million. I felt the bile rise in my throat. They had taken out a policy on my wife. But how? Ada had been paralyzed for 6 years. No insurance company would underwrite a new policy for a stroke victim in her condition unless they lied. I scanned the fine print. And there it was, the clause that explained everything. The clause that explained the yellow liquid in the IV bag. The clause that explained why they dragged her out of the hospital today. Benefit payable only upon death occurring within the primary residence due to natural causes or complications arising from pre-existing conditions. Exclusions apply for death occurring in a medical facility or under suspicious circumstances requiring autopsy. I dropped the folder on the desk. It all made sense. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening clarity. If Ada died in the hospital, the doctors would run tests. They would find the poison. They would find the pancuronium. The insurance would investigate. They would get nothing. But if she died here, in her bed, in her sleep, it would look like nature taking its course, a sad end to a long illness. The local coroner would sign the death certificate without looking twice. Tyrell and Paige would collect $2 million, enough to pay off the sharks, enough to save the house, enough to keep living their lie. They were not just killing her, they were harvesting her. I stood there in the dark, staring at the paper that put a price tag on my wife's life. $2 million. That was what she was worth to them, not the woman who baked cookies for the church sale, not the mother who sat up with Tyrell when he had chickenpox. Just a check waiting to be cashed. I reached for the papers, intending to take them. I needed this. This was the proof. This was the nail in their coffin. Click. The room was suddenly flooded with blinding light. I spun around, shielding my eyes. My heart stopped. Paige was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of red wine loosely in her hand. She did not look surprised. She did not look angry. She looked amused. She took a slow sip of wine, her eyes tracking from my face to the broken drawer and then to the papers scattered on the desk. "Dad," she said, her voice smooth and calm like oil on water. "What are you doing up so late?" I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the insurance policy. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. I was looking for," I stammered, my mind racing. I could not let her know that I understood. If she knew I had read the policy, that I knew about the poison, she would not let me leave this room. Paige took a step into the room. She glanced at the papers but did not acknowledge them. Instead, she looked at me with a pitying expression. "Oh, Moses, you are confused again, aren't you?" She sighed, shaking her head. "This is not the bathroom, Dad. The bathroom is down the hall. Remember? She was doing it. She was doing exactly what they had planned, gaslighting. She was rewriting reality right in front of me. She was not going to confront me about breaking into the desk. She was going to use this as proof that I was losing my mind. "Look at this mess," she said, gesturing to the papers I had exposed. "You pulled everything out. Were you looking for your old work files? You've been retired for 10 years, Moses. You do not work here anymore." She walked over to me. She smelled of expensive wine and lavender lotion. She reached out and gently took the insurance policy from my hand. She did not even look at it. She just placed it back in the drawer, as if it were a child's drawing. "You are having one of your episodes," she said softly, almost tenderly. "Tyrell was right. We need to get you some help. You are wandering around breaking things. It is not safe for you here." I looked into her eyes. They were cold, dead. There was no soul behind them, just calculation. She was daring me to argue. She was daring me to say I knew the truth, because if I did, she would scream. She would wake Tyrell, and I would never make it out of this house. I let my shoulders slump. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I forced my hands to tremble more than they already were. I thought this was my office," I whispered, letting my voice crack. I needed a stamp." Paige smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "Of course you did. Come on, let us get you back to bed. You need your rest. Tomorrow is a big day." She took my arm. Her grip was firm, iron hard. She led me out of the room, away from the evidence, away from the truth. "Tomorrow," she said as she walked me down the hall, "we are going to have a long talk about your living arrangements. I think it is time we made some changes. Do you not agree?" I nodded, shuffling my feet. "Yes, changes." She led me to my room and watched me get into bed. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, silhouetted against the hall light. "Good night, Moses," she said. "Sleep tight." She closed the door. I heard the lock click from the outside. I lay in the dark, listening to her footsteps fade away. She thought she had won. She thought I was a confused old man who had wandered into the wrong room. She thought she had neutralized the threat. But she was wrong. I was not confused. I was awake, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. They had locked me in. They had the poison. They had the insurance policy. But they made one mistake. They let me live through the night. And come morning, the old man they thought was senile was going to burn their whole world to the ground. The sun rose over the suburbs of Atlanta, casting long, deceptive shadows across the lawn of my home. To the neighbors, it was just another quiet morning at the King residence. But inside, I was preparing for a tactical operation. I had not slept. The adrenaline coursing through my veins felt like a drug, sharpening my senses, burning away the fatigue of 71 years. I had a plan. It was risky, insane even, but it was the only way to keep Ada alive until I could get the police involved without them talking their way out of it. I knew Tyrell's routine. He would sleep until 10, hungover from the expensive scotch he had been drinking to celebrate his premature inheritance. That gave me 2 hours. I went to the garage where we kept the medical supplies, a converted storage space filled with boxes of gauze, saline, and the special vitamins. Tyrell insisted on administering himself. I moved with the precision of the logistics foreman I used to be. For 40 years, my job was to ensure that inventory was exactly where it needed to be, that seals were unbroken, and that discrepancies were resolved before the auditors arrived. I knew how to make things look untouched. I found the box on the top shelf, hidden behind a stack of adult diapers. It was labeled supplements. Inside were rows of small glass vials filled with a pale yellow liquid, the pancuronium, the poison that had stolen my wife's voice and movement for 6 years. My hands, which usually trembled with the feigned frailty of age, were rock steady. I took a clean syringe from the supply kit. I grabbed a bottle of saline solution and a small bottle of vitamin B12 from my own stash, which had a natural yellow tint. I sat at the workbench, the smell of oil and sawdust grounding me. One by one, I carefully punctured the rubber seals of the poison vials. I drew out the deadly liquid, emptying it into a jar I had set aside to give to the police later as evidence. Then I mixed the saline with a tiny drop of B12 to match the color. I injected the harmless mixture back into the vials. It was tedious work. Sweat dripped down my forehead, stinging my eyes. I had to ensure the fluid levels were identical. I had to ensure the rubber stoppers did not look chewed up. I wiped every vial down to remove my fingerprints, just in case. I was not just a husband anymore. I was a counterinsurgent in my own home. I finished just as I heard heavy footsteps on the floor above. Tyrell was awake. I quickly hid the jar of poison behind a loose panel in the wall, returned the vials to the box, and placed it back on the shelf exactly as I had found it. I grabbed a broom and started sweeping the floor, transforming instantly back into the confused, helpful old man. The door to the garage swung open. Tyrell stood there, blinking in the bright morning light, wearing a silk robe he had bought with my money. He looked at me with disdain. "What are you doing out here, Dad?" he grumbled, scratching his chest. "It is freezing. Just cleaning, son," I stammered, leaning on the broom. I wanted to be useful. Tyrell rolled his eyes. "Whatever. Go inside. Mom needs her morning drip. I have to prep her meds." I walked past him, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was the test. If he noticed the difference, if he saw that the liquid was slightly less viscous or the color was a fraction of a shade off, he would know. And if he knew I had tampered with it, he would kill me right there. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands shaking for real now. I watched from the doorway as Tyrell went into the garage. I heard the clinking of glass. He was gathering the vials. He came back into the kitchen a few minutes later, carrying the tray with the IV bag and the syringe. He set it down on the counter. I held my breath. He picked up the syringe and the vial. He drew the liquid up. He paused. He held the syringe up to the kitchen light, squinting at it. The liquid glowed a soft gold. "That is weird," he muttered. My blood turned to ice. "What is it, son?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Tyrell tapped the side of the syringe. "This batch looks thinner or something. Maybe it is just the light." He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Did you touch these boxes, Dad?" I gripped my coffee mug, using it to anchor my trembling hands. I moved some boxes to sweep behind them. Did I break something? I let a note of panic enter my voice, the fear of a scolded child. Tyrell stared at me for a long, agonizing second. He was looking for a sign of intelligence, a sign of the father who used to catch him lying about his homework. But I gave him nothing but vacuous confusion. He scoffed, shaking his head. "No, you didn't break anything. Just stay out of my stuff, old man. You are going to mess up the dosage." He turned back to the tray and injected the saline mixture into the IV bag. He did not know. He was arrogant, and his arrogance made him sloppy. He assumed I was too stupid to understand what he was doing, so he never considered that I could outsmart him. "I will go hook her up," Tyrell said, grabbing the IV stand. "You go sit in the living room, watch your shows. Stay out of the way." I watched him walk into Ida's room. I watched him hook up the bag that I had neutralized. I watched the clear liquid start to drip down the line, entering my wife's veins. But this time, it was not poison. It was water. It was life. I sat in the living room for hours, staring at the television without seeing it. I was waiting. Dr. Evans had said the effects of pancuronium wear off, if not replenished. If I stopped the poison, her body would start to flush it out. But how long would it take? And what would happen when it did? By 2:00 the afternoon, the house was quiet. Tyrell had gone out to meet investors, which I knew meant gambling. Paige was in her office, shouting at someone on the phone about a closing date. I crept into Ada's room. I closed the door softly and pulled a chair up to her bedside. "Ada," I whispered, taking her hand. "Can you hear me? It is Moses." "I know, Ada. I know everything. I am so sorry I didn't see it sooner." I watched her face. For the last 6 years, her face had been a mask, slack, expressionless. But as I sat there, I saw something, a twitch. It was so small, I thought I imagined it a tiny spasm at the corner of her mouth. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. "Ada." Her eyelids fluttered, not the slow, heavy blink of the drugged, but a rapid, struggling flutter, like someone trying to wake up from a nightmare. Then her index finger, the one resting in my palm, moved. It curled inward, scratching against my skin. It was weak, barely a tremor, but it was voluntary. "Oh God," I sobbed quietly, pressing my forehead against her hand. "You are back. You are coming back." Her eyes opened wide. For the first time in years, they were not glassy. They were focused. They locked onto mine with a terrifying intensity. They were filled with tears. They pulled at the corners of her eyes and rolled down her temples into her hair. She was crying. She was feeling. The chemical chains were breaking. Her lips parted. She tried to speak. No sound came out, just a dry rasp of air. Her throat muscles were still weak, atrophied from years of silence. But I saw the shape of the word she was trying to form. "Help." I squeezed her hand, tears streaming down my own face. "I am here, baby. I am going to get you out. I promise." But then the terror hit me. She was moving. She was crying. If Paige walked in right now, if Tyrell came home early, if they saw her move, if they saw the light in her eyes, they would know the poison had stopped. They would know someone had tampered with the IV, and they would not use poison next time. They would use a pillow or an accidental fall. Ada's recovery was a miracle, but it was also a death sentence if we were not careful. I had to hide her progress. I had to tell her to play dead, just like I was playing senile. Ada, listen to me, I whispered urgently, wiping her tears away with my thumb. You have to stay still. You cannot move when they are here. Do you understand? If they see you move, they will hurt you. You have to pretend just for a little longer. Her eyes searched mine, filled with fear and confusion, but then slowly she blinked once. She understood. I heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Tyrell was home. "Dad, where are you?" he shouted. I looked at Ada one last time. She let her eyes go blank. She slackened her jaw. She returned to the prison of her paralysis, but this time she had the key. I stood up and shuffled toward the door, my heart pounding like a war drum. The tide had turned. My wife was back, and together we were going to bring the whole house down on top of them. I knew that my physical presence was not enough. I could not stand guard over Ada every second of every day. I had to sleep eventually. I had to use the bathroom, and every moment I stepped away was an opportunity for them to undo my work, or worse, to end it permanently. I needed eyes that never blinked. I needed a witness that could not be gaslighted or intimidated. It was trash day, a mundane suburban ritual that I turned into a covert operation. I gathered the bags from the kitchen, moving with the slow, shuffling gait that Tyrell and Paige expected from me. "I am taking the trash out, son," I called out to Tyrell, who was sitting on the couch watching sports with a beer in his hand at 10:0 the morning. He did not even look away from the screen. "Just do not wander off, old man, and do not talk to the neighbors. You embarrassed us enough last time." I gritted my teeth and stepped out into the humid Atlanta morning. The heat was already rising off the pavement. I walked down the driveway, dragging the bin to the curb. I looked left, then right. The street was empty. I walked over to the side fence that separated my property from Mr. Henderson's. Henderson was a retired police sergeant, a man made of leather and grit who had seen the worst of humanity during his 30 years on the force. We had not spoken much lately because Paige had isolated me, telling the neighbors I was becoming aggressive. But Henderson was old school. He trusted his gut, not gossip. I tapped on the wooden slat 3 times, a signal we had used years ago when we traded gardening tips. A moment later, Henderson appeared. He was pruning his roses, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at me and then at the house, ensuring no one was watching. "Moses, you look like hell," he said quietly. "I feel like it, Arthur. I need a favor." "A big one," I whispered, leaning close to the wood. "I need eyes inside. They are hurting her." Henderson did not ask questions. He did not ask for proof. He simply nodded. He reached into his gardening bucket and pulled out a small box. "I had a feeling things were going south over there," he said, handing the box over the fence. "It is a nanny cam hidden inside a digital alarm clock, motion-activated, night vision. It connects to an app on your phone. I set it up on my secure network so they cannot trace it on your Wi-Fi." I took the box, my hands trembling. "Thank you, Arthur. I do not know how to repay you." Henderson's face hardened. "You do not owe me anything. But you should know something, Moses. Last week I was up early drinking my coffee on the porch. I saw that daughter-in-law of yours come out to the bins. She had your prescription bottles, the heart medication, the blood pressure pills. My stomach dropped. I had been looking for those. I thought I had misplaced them. I thought my memory was finally going. She emptied them into the trash bag," Henderson continued, his voice low and angry. "And then she put the empty bottles back in her pocket. They are trying to make you sick or make you think you are crazy." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. It was not just my mind playing tricks. It was a systematic dismantling of my reality. They were gaslighting me while they murdered my wife. "I have to go," I said, tucking the box under my shirt. "Thank you, Arthur." "Watch your back, Moses," Henderson said, gripping his pruning shears. "If you need backup, you flash your porch light 3 times. I still have my service piece." I walked back to the house, the weight of the clock against my ribs feeling heavier than lead. I had a weapon now, but I had to deploy it without being caught. I entered the kitchen. Tyrell was still on the couch. Paige was in her office, probably looking for new ways to spend money she did not have. I went straight to the master bedroom. Ada was lying there, staring at the ceiling. I closed the door softly. I moved quickly. On the nightstand was an old digital clock with red numbers. I unplugged it and shoved it deep into the back of the closet under a pile of blankets. I unpacked the device Henderson had given me. It looked identical to a standard modern alarm clock. Black plastic, blue numbers, innocuous. I plugged it in. I set it on the nightstand, angling it perfectly so the lens hidden in the display face pointed directly at the bed. I pulled out my phone, the burner phone I kept hidden, and downloaded the app Henderson had written on a sticky note inside the box. The feed popped up instantly, crystal clear, high definition. I could see every line on Ada's face. I could see the rise and fall of her chest. I leaned down and kissed Ada on the forehead. "I am watching you," I whispered. "I am always watching. Do not be afraid." I left the room and went to my own bedroom, closing the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the small screen of my phone. It was my lifeline, my window into hell. Hours passed. I watched the empty room. I watched the sunlight move across the floor. And then, around 2:00 the afternoon, the door on the screen opened. Paige walked in. She was wearing a white silk blouse and black slacks, looking every inch the successful professional she pretended to be, but her face was twisted in a snarl. She was carrying a bowl of soup. I turned the volume up on my phone, pressing it to my ear. "Time to eat, Ada," Paige said, her voice flat and cold. "And do not make a mess today. I just had these sheets cleaned." She set the bowl down on the nightstand right next to the camera. I held my breath. If she looked closely, if she noticed the new clock, but she did not look at the clock. She looked at my wife with pure, unadulterated hatred. She grabbed a spoon and scooped up the soup. It looked hot. Steam was rising from it. She did not blow on it. She shoved the spoon toward Ada's mouth. "Open up," Paige ordered. Ada's lips remained closed. I knew why. Her throat muscles were still recovering. Swallowing was difficult. She was afraid of choking. She needed patience. She needed gentleness. Paige had neither. She jammed the metal spoon against Ada's teeth. "Open your mouth, you useless old hag," Paige hissed. My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Ada tried. I saw her jaw tremble. She opened her mouth slightly. Paige shoved the hot soup in, spilling half of it down Eda's chin and onto the pristine white sheets. "Look at that!" Paige shouted, slamming the spoon back into the bowl. "Look at what you did. You are disgusting. You are just a giant baby, a waste of space." She grabbed a napkin and scrubbed Ada's face roughly, her nails digging into my wife's soft skin. Ada's eyes widened in pain. Tears began to pool in them. "Why don't you just die?" Paige whispered, leaning in close, her face inches from Eda's. "Why are you so stubborn? Nobody wants you here. Moses is tired of you. Tyrell hates looking at you. We are all just waiting for you to stop breathing so we can be free." And then she did it. Because Ada made a small gurgling sound of distress, Paige pulled her hand back and slapped my wife across the face. The sound was tiny through the phone speaker, but it echoed in my soul like a thunderclap. It was a hard, vicious slap. Ada's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed instantly on her pale cheek. "Stop crying," Paige screamed, raising her hand again. "Stop it or I will give you something that will make you sleep for a week." I bit my lips so hard I tasted the hot, metallic tang of blood. My entire body convulsed with the urge to run down the hall, burst into that room, and tear that woman apart with my bare hands. I was a strong man. I could snap her neck before she even screamed, but I froze. I forced my muscles to lock. If I went in there now, I would go to prison for assault or murder. Paige would claim self-defense. Tyrell would back her up. The police would see an angry black man attacking a white woman in her own home. I would lose, and Ada would be left alone with them forever. I needed the recording. I needed the proof. I needed the world to see what I was seeing. I watched as Paige threw the napkin on the floor and stormed out of the room, leaving my wife crying silently in the dark, her cheek burning, her heart breaking. I looked at the screen, at the red record icon blinking in the corner. I had it. I had the assault. I had the verbal abuse. I had the confession that they wanted her dead. I swallowed the blood in my mouth. I wiped my eyes. "You made a mistake, Paige," I whispered to the empty room. "You just signed your own death warrant." I saved the video file, sending it to the encrypted cloud server Dr. Evans had set up for me. Then I stood up. I went to the bathroom and washed the blood from my lip. I looked in the mirror. The eyes staring back at me were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of an executioner waiting for the drop. I would not kill her. That was too easy. I was going to destroy her. I was going to take everything she loved, everything she valued, everything she stole and burn it in front of her face. And then, when she was nothing but ash, I would hand her over to the law. But first, I had to make sure the poison was truly gone. I had to make sure Etta was strong enough to survive the war that was coming. Because tonight, the real battle began. The rain was coming down in sheets, turning the streets of Atlanta into slick mirrors of neon and misery. It was the perfect cover for a man with secrets. I told Tyrell I needed to go to the 24-hour pharmacy to pick up his special protein powder. The only brand he claimed did not upset his stomach. He did not even look up from his phone. He just waved a hand, dismissing me like a servant. "Take the van," he muttered, "and do not scratch it." I did not take the van. I took my old Buick, the one I kept covered in the back of the garage under a tarp. Tyrell thought it was broken down scrap metal. He did not know I started it every Sunday while he slept to keep the engine purring. I drove 5 miles out of town to a derelict diner parking lot off the interstate, a place where truckers slept and deals went down in the shadows. I parked in the darkest corner under a broken street lamp. A minute later, a silver sedan pulled up beside me. It was Dr. Evans. He looked worse than he had at the hospital. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he kept checking his rearview mirror. He did not get out. He just rolled down his window an inch. I did the same. The rain blew in, cold and sharp against my face. "Here, Doctor," Evans whispered, passing a thick manila envelope through the gap. "Do not let anyone see this. If they find out I gave you these patient records without a court order, I lose my license. I go to jail." I took the envelope, tucking it inside my jacket. "What is it, Doctor? What did you find?" "Doctor," Evans looked at me, and for a moment I thought he was going to cry. He took a deep, shaky breath. "It was never a stroke, Moses." The words hung in the air between the cars, heavy as lead. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "We saw the scans, the paralysis, the loss of speech. Fake. All of it, Doctor," Evans hissed. "I ran a full toxicology panel on the blood sample I took yesterday. I sent it to a private lab a friend of mine runs. Moses, your wife has been systematically dosed with tubocurarine, a derivative of curare." "Curare?" The word sounded exotic and dangerous. "It is a neuromuscular blocking agent, Doctor," Evans explained, his voice trembling with rage. "It blocks the signals between the nerves and the muscles. It causes total paralysis. You cannot move. You cannot speak. You cannot even blink if the dose is high enough. But here is the thing, Moses, it does not affect the brain, and it does not affect the sensory nerves." I stared at him, the rain soaking my sleeve. I felt a cold pit opening in my stomach. "What are you saying?" "I am saying she has been awake for 6 years. She has been fully conscious. Her mind is sharp. She can hear everything. She can see everything. And Moses, she can feel everything." I let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Oh God." She felt every bed sore. "Doctor," Evans continued relentlessly, forcing me to hear the horror of it. She felt the cramps in her legs from lying still for days. She felt the hunger when they forgot to feed her. She felt the thirst. She felt the humiliation of the diapers. And she felt every single time they touched her roughly. She was trapped in her own body, screaming for 6 years, and no one could hear her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather cracked. The levels in her blood suggest they have been microdosing her, just enough to keep her immobile, but not enough to stop her heart until yesterday. Yesterday, the levels spiked. They are ramping it up, Moses. They are done playing. They are going to stop her diaphragm. She will suffocate, and it will look like respiratory failure. "I have to go back," I said, starting the engine. "I have to kill them." "No." "Doctor." Evans reached out, grabbing my arm through the window. "Do not do anything stupid. You need the police. You need this report. If you kill them, the truth dies with them. You have to catch them in the act." My phone rang. It was not the burner phone. It was my regular cell. The ringtone cut through the sound of the rain like a siren. I looked at the screen. "Tyrell." I answered, putting it on speaker. "Dad, where the hell are you?" Tyrell's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. "I am at the pharmacy, son," I lied, my voice steady despite the rage burning me alive. There was a line. "Get back here now," Tyrell screamed. "Something is wrong with Mom. She is making these noises. She is gasping. Her chest is heaving. I think she's having another stroke." My heart stopped. The saline. The poison was wearing off. Her muscles were waking up. Her diaphragm was spasming as it tried to remember how to work on its own. "Call 911, I shouted. "Call the ambulance, Tyrell." "No. No police. No ambulances," Tyrell yelled back. "Paige says it is too risky. If she dies here. We are not dragging her back to the hospital so that nosy doctor can ask more questions. He was going to let her die. Or worse, he was going to finish her off because she was starting to move." "Listen to me, Tyrell," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I am 5 minutes away. Do not touch her. Do not do anything until I get there." "You better hurry, old man," Tyrell hissed, "because she is turning blue. And Paige is already on the phone with the cremation service. She says, if Mom goes tonight, we are having her cremated immediately. No autopsy, no funeral, just ash. It is cheaper that way." The line went dead. Cremation. They were going to burn the evidence. If they cremated her, the curare would be destroyed. The puncture marks from the needles would be gone. There would be no proof, just a pile of ash and a fat insurance check. I looked at Dr. Evans. He had heard everything. His face was white as a sheet. "Go," he whispered. "Go save her, Moses. I will call the detective I know, but you have to stop that cremation." I slammed the car into gear. The tires screeched on the wet asphalt. I did not care about speed limits. I did not care about safety. My wife was alive. She had been alive and suffering for 6 years while I played the fool. But the fool was dead. The man driving that Buick was a force of nature. I tore down the highway, the rain lashing against the windshield like tears. I thought of Ada trapped in the dark, screaming without a voice. I thought of Paige slapping her face. I thought of Tyrell talking about cremation like he was taking out the trash. "Hang on, Etta," I whispered to the empty car, pressing the accelerator to the floor. "I am coming, and I am bringing the storm with me." I pulled the Buick onto the lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in the manicured grass that Paige prized so highly. I did not care about the landscaping. I did not care about the neighbors. I ran to the front porch, my knees protesting with every step, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached for the smart lock keypad. My fingers punched in the code I had used for 10 years. 1952, the year Ada and I met. Red light. A harsh electronic buzz rejected me. I tried again. Maybe my hands were shaking too much. 1952. Red light. Access denied. Panic rose in my throat like bile. They had changed the code. They had locked me out of the house I built with my own money, the house I had welcomed them into when they had nowhere else to go. I pounded on the heavy oak door with my fist. "Open the door, Tyrell," I shouted. "Let me in." The Ring doorbell camera glowed with a soft blue light. Then, Paige's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, distorted, digital, but the mockery was crystal clear. "Did you get lost, Daddy Moses? You look so confused out there. Do not worry. We are letting you back in, but this is the last time. You are not going out anymore. It is not safe for a man in your condition to be wandering the streets at night." The lock mechanism whirred and clicked. The door swung open a few inches. I pushed inside, ready to fight, ready to run to Ada's room and perform CPR if I had to. But the hallway was quiet. There was no chaotic scene, no paramedics, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock. Tyrell was standing at the end of the hall, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He was not panicked. He was not crying. He looked bored. "Where is she?" I demanded, stepping toward him. "You said she was dying. You said she was turning blue." Tyrell pushed off the wall. He was big taller than me now. He had the muscle of a man who spent his time at the gym while his father worked. He stepped into my personal space, looming over me. "She is fine, old man," he said, his voice flat. "She stabilized. It was just a little hiccup. But you are the problem." He reached out fast as a snake and snatched the phone from my hand. I tried to grab it back, but he shoved me hard against the entryway table. A vase wobbled and crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. "Hey, be careful," Paige yelled, walking out of the kitchen. "That vase cost $300. She looked at me with disgust. "Look at him, Tyrell. He is a mess. He is violent, throwing things, driving around in the rain. He is clearly having an episode." It was a setup, a trap to get me back inside and stripped of my communications. Ada was the bait. "Give me my phone, Tyrell," I said, keeping my voice low, trying to regain some dignity. "I need to call the doctor." "You do not need to call anyone," Tyrell said, slipping my phone into his pocket. You need to sit down and shut up. We are confiscating this for your own good. You have been making nuisance calls, bothering people, telling crazy stories. We cannot have you embarrassing the family. He grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising. He dragged me into the living room. Sit, he ordered, pointing at the recliner. I sat, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to assess the situation. I was trapped. The doors were digital locks controlled by their phones. The windows were storm-proof double panes. I was 71 years old, and I was a prisoner in my own living room. Is she alive? I asked, looking toward the hallway that led to Ada's room. I told you she is fine, Tyrell said, pacing in front of the television. Better than fine, actually. She is sleeping like a baby. He was lying about her being fine, but he was telling the truth about her being alive. I could feel it. If she were dead, the atmosphere would be different. They would be frantic, trying to stage the scene. This was the calm before the storm. They were waiting for something. Paige walked in, holding a tablet. She tapped on the screen, checking the security feed. Every door is secured. Motion sensors are active. If he tries to leave, the alarm will scream loud enough to wake the dead. She looked at me and smiled a thin, cruel smile. It is for your safety, Moses. We cannot have you wandering off and getting hurt. Not before the big day. The big day. The words hung in the air. She did not mean a birthday or a holiday. She meant the day they cashed out. I watched them. Tyrell was agitated, pacing back and forth, checking his watch. Paige was cool, scrolling through her tablet, probably looking at expensive handbags she planned to buy with my life savings. They were not looking at me as a father or a father-in-law. They were looking at me as a loose end that needed to be tied up. You guys seem tense, I said, leaning back in the chair, affecting the tremulous voice of the confused old man I had played earlier. Is it about money? I can help? I have some savings in the coffee tin. Tyrell stopped pacing. He laughed a harsh, barking sound. The coffee tin. Yeah, Dad, your $200 is really going to save us. You have no idea, do you? You have no idea what real money looks like. He walked over to the minibar in the corner and poured himself a drink. His hands were shaking. He was scared. The loan sharks. The debt. The timeline was compressing. They needed Eda dead tonight, and they needed me incapacitated so I could not interfere. I need to use the bathroom, I said, starting to rise. Sit down, Tyrell snapped. You can hold it or use a bottle. I do not care. You are not leaving this room. He was escalating. The mask of the caring son was slipping. He was just a thug now, a desperate thug backed into a corner. Paige looked up from her tablet. Tyrell, baby, calm down. He needs to relax. Look at him. He is shaking. She stood up and walked to the kitchen. I heard the microwave beep, the whir of the fan, the clink of a spoon against a mug. My heart rate spiked. This was it, the sedation. Paige came back into the room carrying a steaming mug. It smelled of warm milk and honey, a comfort drink, something a mother would give a child, or a killer would give a victim. Here, Moses, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Drink this. It is warm milk with a little nutmeg. It will help you sleep. You look so tired. You have had a big day running around in the rain. She held the mug out to me. Tyrell stepped closer, his hand resting near the heavy glass decanter on the bar. The threat was implicit. Drink it, or we force it down your throat. I reached out with a trembling hand. Thank you, Paige. You are a good girl, always looking after me. I brought the mug to my lips. The steam hit my face. Beneath the scent of milk and nutmeg, there was a chemical acridity, bitter, metallic. They had crushed pills into it. Maybe sleeping pills. Maybe antipsychotics. Maybe the same poison they gave Ada. I took a sip. I did not swallow. I held the hot liquid in my mouth, letting it burn my tongue. I made a show of swallowing, gulping air to make my throat bob. Good, Tyrell said, watching me closely. Drink it all? I took another sip, holding that one too. My cheeks bulged slightly. I needed to get rid of it. I feel a bit sick, I mumbled through the liquid, keeping my lips tight. The heat. I leaned forward, coughing. I grabbed the large potted fern that stood next to the recliner. It was a big, leafy plant Ada had loved. I buried my face in the leaves, pretending to heave. Gross, old man. Do not puke on the rug, Paige shrieked, jumping back. In the chaos of her disgust, I spat the mouthful of poisoned milk into the dark soil of the planter. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve, making a retching sound. I am sorry, I gasped, sitting back up. I think it went down the wrong way. Finish it, Tyrell commanded, stepping forward. I do not care if you are sick. Finish the milk. It will settle your stomach. He watched me like a hawk. I raised the mug again. I had to be smarter. I took a small sip, actually swallowing a tiny amount to sell the act. It tasted vile. I grimaced. Then I tipped the mug up high, obscuring my face with the bottom of the cup. I let the liquid run down my chin, soaking into my shirt collar, pretending I was drinking greedily, while actually letting most of it spill onto my clothes. Ah, that is better, I said, lowering the empty mug. My shirt was wet and warm. Tyrell grabbed the mug from my hand. Good. Now go to sleep. We have a lot to do tonight. He turned off the overhead light, leaving me in the dim glow of the street lamps outside. Paige and Tyrell walked toward the kitchen, whispering. He is out, Tyrell whispered. Give it 20 minutes. He will be out cold. Then we finish it, Paige hissed back. Tonight, Tyrell. No more delays. The payment is due tomorrow. They left me in the semi-darkness. They thought I was drifting off into a chemically induced coma. They thought they had neutralized the only witness. But the milk was in the plant. The poison was on my shirt, not in my blood. I sat in the chair, letting my breathing slow and deepen, mimicking sleep. My eyes were closed to slits, watching, waiting. They were preparing for the finale. They were going to kill Ada tonight. But they forgot one thing. They locked me in the living room. But the living room connected to the hallway, and the hallway connected to the closet where I kept my old baseball bat, the one I used to chase away stray dogs. I was not asleep. I was a coil waiting to spring. And tonight, when they walked into that bedroom to end my wife's life, they were going to find out that the old man was not helpless. He was hunting. I sat in the chair, my body heavy, my mind racing. The milk I had spit into the plant was supposed to be my sedative, my ticket to oblivion. Tyrell and Paige were watching me from the kitchen island, their silhouettes sharp against the dim light. They were waiting for me to slump over. They were waiting for the silence. But I was not going to give them silence. I was going to give them chaos. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted to see. A broken, senile old man losing his mind. I let my head loll back, my mouth falling open. I started to hum a low, discordant sound that vibrated in my chest. Then I let the hum turn into a mumble. The boxes, I slurred, my voice thick. The boxes are wrong. Inventory count is off. Tell the boys to restack the pallets. Tyrell stepped closer, his glass of scotch in hand. What is he talking about? He is hallucinating, Paige said, her voice filled with disdain. The drugs are kicking in. Finally, I stood up. I did it clumsily, knocking the side table with my hip. The lamp wobbled and crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering with a pop. Hey, Tyrell shouted. Watch it, old man. I did not look at him. I looked at the wall, my eyes wide and unfocused. Fire in the hole, I screamed, pointing at the painting of the fruit bowl. Get the water. The warehouse is burning. Save the inventory. I grabbed a throw pillow from the couch and threw it at the imaginary fire. I stumbled forward, knocking over a stack of magazines. I was a whirlwind of clumsy, destructive energy. I channeled every ounce of fear, every drop of rage, and twisted it into madness. Then came the hardest part, the part that required me to sacrifice the last shred of my dignity to save my wife. I stood in the middle of the expensive Persian rug Paige loved so much. I relaxed my bladder. I let the warm urine flow down my legs, soaking my trousers, pooling on the wool. The shame was hot and sharp, but I held on to it. I used it. I looked down at the wet spot spreading around my shoes. I looked up at Tyrell, my face crumbling into the expression of a confused, terrified child. I had an accident, I whimpered. I made a mess. Paige let out a shriek of pure disgust. Oh my God, he is pissing on the rug. Tyrell, do something. He is ruining everything. Tyrell just laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. Look at him, Paige. He is gone. His brain is mush. The cocktail worked better than we thought. He is not even here anymore. He walked over to me, stepping carefully around the puddle. He waved his hand in front of my face. I did not blink. I stared through him, muttering about shipping manifests and lost cargo. You are a vegetable, Dad, Tyrell sneered. A wet, smelly vegetable. He shoved me back into the recliner. Sit there and rot. We have real business to discuss. They turned their backs on me. That was the victory. They turned their backs. To them, I was no longer a person. I was an object, a nuisance, a piece of furniture that smelled like urine. They did not lower their voices because you do not whisper in front of a broken toaster. Paige grabbed a bottle of wine and poured herself a large glass, her hands shaking. I cannot believe we have to deal with this, she hissed, taking a long gulp. But at least he is out of the way. Now about tomorrow, Tyrell said, leaning against the counter. We are good for tomorrow. Once Mom is gone tonight, I call the insurance agent in the morning. I already have the claim forms filled out. We tell them she passed peacefully in her sleep, respiratory failure, expected complications. It has to be fast, Tyrell, Paige said, her voice tight with a fear I had not heard before. I got a text from Marcus. He is not waiting anymore. Marcus? That was a name I did not know. Tell him to back off, Tyrell said, trying to sound tough but failing. Tell him the money is coming. I cannot tell him anything, Paige slammed her glass down. He knows, Tyrell. He knows I lied about the investment fund. He knows there is no crypto portfolio. I stopped my mumbling for a split second, my heart seizing. Investment fund. Crypto. He lent me $500,000 because I promised him a 20% return in 3 months, Paige continued, her voice rising in hysteria. I told him I had insider tips. I told him I was a genius, and I lost it all. Every single cent. I put it all on black, Tyrell. I put it on risky futures that tanked overnight. I listened, my mind reeling. It was not just Tyrell's gambling, it was Paige. She was the one who had dug the hole. $500,000. $500,000. He is not a bank, Tyrell, Paige sobbed. He is the cartel. He launders money through real estate. That is how I met him. He told me if he does not have his principal plus interest by noon tomorrow, he is going to send a crew to the house. He said he will cut off my fingers first, one by one, until the debt is paid, and then he will start on you. The reality of their desperation crashed down on me. They were not just greedy. They were dead people walking. They had stolen my money, maxed out my credit, and it still was not enough. They had burned through everything. The $2 million from Ada's life insurance was not a windfall for a luxury life. It was a ransom payment for their own lives. We have no choice, Tyrell said, his voice trembling. We have to do it tonight right now. If we wait until morning, the coroner might not get here in time to certify the death before Marcus shows up. Is it enough? Paige asked. Is the dose high enough? I used the whole vial, Tyrell said. I put enough pentobarbital in that milk to kill a horse, but the old man spilled half of it. He looked over at me. I let my head loll to the side, drool escaping the corner of my mouth. I twitched my hand, muttering nonsense. He is out of it. Tyrell dismissed me. But Mom is the priority. I am going to give her the rest of the pancuronium. All of it. It will stop her diaphragm in 5 minutes. It will look like she just stopped breathing. Do it, Paige said, wiping her eyes. Do it now. I want this nightmare to be over. They finished their drinks. They steeled themselves. They were pumping themselves up to murder my wife because they were too incompetent to pay their own debts. I will go get the kit, Tyrell said, pushing off the counter. I will go make sure the back door is unlocked for the coroner, Paige said. We need to set the scene, make it look peaceful, put some flowers by the bed. They split up. Tyrell headed for the garage. Paige went to the back of the house. I sat in the chair, the urine cold and sticky on my legs. My heart was beating a war rhythm against my ribs. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought I was defeated. But I knew something they did not. I knew that the baseball bat was in the hall closet 5 feet away. I knew that Tyrell was walking into a trap, and I knew that a man who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. I waited until their footsteps faded. Then I stopped shaking. I wiped the drool from my chin. I stood up silent as a shadow. The act was over. The father was gone. The husband was here and he was angry. I waited until the sliding glass door clicked shut. Through the sheer curtains, I could see the silhouette of my son and his wife standing by the illuminated swimming pool. Their body language was violent, Tyrell, pacing, his hands flying in the air, while Paige stood rigid, her arms crossed, shaking her head. They were arguing about the money, about who was going to take the fall when the loan sharks came for their fingers. They were distracted by their own greed and fear. I moved. I did not shuffle. I did not stumble. I walked with the silent, purposeful stride of a man who had spent his life navigating loading docks and inventory rooms without being seen. I went to the hall closet, the one filled with old coats and forgotten boots. On the top shelf, inside a beat-up shoebox labeled winter gear, was my lifeline. It was a Nokia, a brick, a phone older than my granddaughter. It had been sitting there for 5 years, charged and turned off, waiting for a day I prayed would never come. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up with a dull green glow. Full battery. Those old machines were built to last just like me. I dialed a number I had memorized a decade ago. It rang once. Moses. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and alert. It was Ms. Sterling. To the world, she was a high-powered corporate attorney who handled mergers and acquisitions. To Tyrell and Paige, she was a ghost, someone they did not even know existed. But to me, she was the guardian of the empire I had built in the shadows. She knew about the 3 industrial warehouses I owned near the airport. She knew about the land I had bought in the 80 seconds when everyone said the neighborhood was dead. She knew that the pension I lived on was actually interest from a diversified portfolio worth millions. She was the only person on earth who knew that Moses King was not just a retired foreman, but a wealthy man who lived simply because he valued peace over possessions. "Miss Sterling," I said, keeping my voice low, my eyes fixed on the couple arguing by the pool. "It is time." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a chair shifting. "You want to execute the exit strategy?" "No," I said. "The exit strategy was for running away. That time has passed. I want to execute Plan Z." Plan Z. We had laughed about it when we drew it up, the zombie plan. The plan for when the dead need to rise and fight back. It authorized her to use the full weight of my resources to destroy anyone threatening my life regardless of who they were. Even if they were family. Especially if they were family. "Understood," Sterling said, her tone shifting from lawyer to general. "What is the situation?" "They are trying to kill Ada tonight," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Poison. And they are going to stage it as a natural death to collect on a fraudulent insurance policy. I need you here now." "I am 20 minutes out," she replied instantly. "How do I play it?" "Social services," I instructed. An anonymous tip from a neighbor about elder abuse. A surprise welfare check. You need to get into the house. You need to get into the bedroom. And you need to tag her. Tag her. It was a logistics term. Tracking inventory. "I have the device," Sterling confirmed. "I will be there. Sit tight, Moses. And do not let them see the lion before the cage is closed." I hung up. I removed the battery from the phone and put it back in the shoebox. I returned to the recliner and slumped down, letting my mouth hang open, returning to the role of the broken old man. Outside, the argument was escalating. I could hear Paige's voice rising, shrill and terrified. "You told me you had it handled, Tyrell. You told me the crypto was a sure thing." "Shut up, Paige," Tyrell roared back. "Just shut up. We fix this tonight. Once she is dead, we call the broker in the morning. We can get an advance on the policy." They came back inside a moment later, bringing the cold air with them. Paige looked disheveled, her perfect hair windblown, her makeup smudged. Tyrell looked manic, his eyes darting around the room. They looked at me with pure loathing. "Is he still out?" Paige asked, kicking my foot lightly. I let out a snore, twitching my leg. "Yeah, he is gone," Tyrell muttered. "Look at him, useless." They went into the kitchen. I heard the clinking of glass. They were mixing the final dose, the lethal dose. I checked the grandfather clock. Ms. Sterling was fast, but traffic in Atlanta was unforgiving. I needed to buy time. I needed to create a distraction without breaking character. I let out a loud groan and shifted in the chair, knocking the side table again. "Water," I mumbled loudly. "Thirsty. Need water." Tyrell slammed his hand on the counter. "Oh my God, will you just die already?" He marched over to me with a glass of tap water. "Here, drink it and shut up." He shoved the glass into my hand, spilling half of it on my shirt. I drank greedily, letting the water run down my chin, buying seconds. Every second counted. Every second was a heartbeat my wife still had. Then the doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a long, insistent press that demanded attention. Tyrell and Paige froze. They looked at each other, panic flashing between them. It was 9 at night. Nobody came to the door at 9, except trouble. "Who is that?" Paige whispered. "Is it Marcus? Is it the loan shark?" Tyrell pulled a kitchen knife from the block. "Stay here. Keep an eye on the old man." He walked to the door, hiding the knife behind his leg. He looked through the peephole. His shoulders relaxed slightly, but the tension remained. "It is a woman," he whispered back to Paige. "She looks official. She has a badge, social services, just as I ordered." Tyrell opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I strained my ears. I heard Miss Sterling's voice, but it was different. She had dropped her posh boardroom accent and adopted the weary, no-nonsense tone of an overworked government employee. "Mr. Tyrell King, I am Evelyn Sterling, Department of Adult Protective Services. We received a priority call regarding the welfare of 2 seniors at this address. I need to come in. No, Tyrell said, trying to close the door. It is late. My parents are sleeping. You can come back tomorrow during business hours. I am afraid that is not how this works, sir, Sterling said, and I heard the sound of her foot wedging the door open. A Priority 1 report involves allegations of immediate physical danger. By law, I am required to visually verify the safety of the subjects. If you refuse entry, I am authorized to call law enforcement to assist me. Do you want police cruisers on your lawn at this hour? Tyrell hesitated. He looked back at Paige. Police were the last thing they wanted. Police meant questions. Police meant looking at the IV bag in the kitchen. A social worker was a nuisance, but the police were a death sentence. Let her in, Paige hissed. Get rid of her fast. Tyrell opened the door. Miss. Sterling stepped in. She was wearing a beige trench coat and holding a clipboard. She looked nothing like the woman who managed my millions. She looked like a bureaucrat who had seen it all and was not impressed. She scanned the room. Her eyes swept over me, slumped in the chair, covered in water and my own urine. She did not flinch. She did not show a flicker of recognition. She made a note on her clipboard. Subject 1. Moses King appears disoriented. Hygiene neglected. She looked at Tyrell. Where is the wife? Ada King. She is sleeping, Paige said, stepping forward, putting on her best smile. Look, this is a misunderstanding. My father-in-law has dementia. He wanders. He tells stories. We take excellent care of them. I need to see her, Sterling said, cutting her off. Now. She walked past them, heading straight for the hallway. She knew exactly where the room was. I had sent her the floor plans years ago when I bought the place. Tyrell and Paige scrambled to follow her. I waited a beat, then hauled myself up and shuffled after them, playing the confused shadow. Sterling pushed open the door to the master bedroom. The room smelled of sickness and stale air. Ada was lying in the bed, her eyes closed. She was playing her part perfectly. Sterling walked to the bedside. She clicked a penlight and shone it in Ada's eyes. Ada did not react. Sterling checked her pulse. She seems stable, Sterling said, turning to Tyrell. But she looks dehydrated, and these bruises on her arm. She pointed to the marks where Tyrell had roughly handled her. Older skin bruises easily, Paige said quickly. We have to move her to change the sheets. It happens. Sterling hummed, non-committally. She leaned over Ada, adjusting the blanket. It was a smooth, practiced movement. As she tucked the blanket around Ada's legs, I saw her hand slip under the frame of the wheelchair that sat next to the bed. It was a blink and you miss it moment. She stuck a small magnetic GPS tracker to the metal strut underneath the seat. She stood up and turned to face them. Well, they are alive, but the conditions here are concerning. The husband is soiled. The wife is non-responsive. I'm going to open a case file. I will be back tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with a medical team for a full evaluation. If I find any evidence of neglect, I will have them removed from your custody immediately tomorrow morning. She was giving them a deadline. She was forcing their hand. She knew they could not wait until morning. She was pushing them into a corner where they would make mistakes. Fine, Tyrell said, his jaw clenched. Come back tomorrow. You will see we are doing everything right. Sterling walked out of the room. She stopped in front of me on her way to the door. She looked me in the eye. For a second, the mask slipped. I saw the fierce loyalty burning in her gaze. Hang in there, Mr. King, she said, loud enough for them to hear. Help is coming. Then she left. The door closed. Tyrell locked it and turned to Paige. His face was twisted with panic. Tomorrow morning, he whispered. She is bringing a medical team tomorrow morning. They will find the poison. They will see the levels. We cannot wait, Paige said, her eyes wide and wild. We have to do it now, right now, before the storm hits. They looked at each other. They looked at the clock. It is go time, Tyrell said. They ran to the kitchen. I heard the drawer open. I heard the rattle of the syringe. I stood in the hallway, listening to the thunder rumble outside. The storm was here, and so was I. The storm broke over Atlanta with the violence of a judgment day. Rain hammered against the roof like gravel thrown by an angry giant. Thunder rattled the window panes in their frames. The wind howled down the chimney. It was the kind of weather that made you feel small and insignificant. But inside the house, the atmosphere was even more volatile. The air was thick with the electricity of impending violence. I stood in the hallway, listening to the chaos outside and the frantic whispering in the kitchen. Then, with a crack that sounded like a gunshot, lightning struck the transformer down the street. The house plunged into absolute darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The digital clocks vanished. For a second, there was silence. Then Paige screamed, "Get a flashlight, Tyrell," she yelled. "I cannot see anything." I heard the fumbling of drawers. The beam of a cell phone flashlight cut through the gloom, casting wild, swinging shadows against the walls. "This is it," Tyrell said, his voice tight with adrenaline. "The power is out. The security cameras are down. The alarm is offline. It is a sign. Paige, we have to do it now." I pressed myself against the wall, letting the shadows swallow me. I knew they would check the living room first to make sure the senile old man was still slumped in his chair. I had seconds. I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I slipped into the master bedroom. Ada was lying there, her eyes wide, reflecting the flashes of lightning that illuminated the room through the sheer curtains. She was terrified. I put a finger to my lips, signaling her to be quiet. I pointed to the walk-in closet. I stepped inside, leaving the door cracked just an inch. It was a narrow vantage point, but it was enough. I was surrounded by the smell of Ada's old coats, the lavender sachets she used to keep the moths away. It was the scent of my life before the nightmare began. I heard them coming down the hall. Their footsteps were heavy, urgent. They were not trying to be quiet anymore. The storm covered the sound of their approach. In the closet, I looked for a weapon. I had left the baseball bat in the hall closet. I was unarmed. My hands brushed against the shelves, clothes, shoes, hat boxes. Then my fingers closed around something cold and heavy. It was an old brass table lamp that we had stored in here years ago when Ada bought new bedside lights. It was solid metal with a heavy base, a blunt instrument. I gripped it by the neck, testing its weight. It felt good. It felt like justice. The bedroom door creaked open. 2 beams of light swept across the room, blindingly bright in the darkness. "Is she awake?" Paige whispered. "Who cares?" Tyrell replied, his voice rough. "She cannot talk. She cannot move. It does not matter what she sees." They approached the bed, the lights focused on Ada. She squeezed her eyes shut, playing dead, playing the victim one last time. But I saw her hands under the sheet. They were clenched into fists. She was fighting the instinct to scream. Tyrell moved to the head of the bed. In the harsh light of the phone flashlight, I saw what he was holding. It was a pillow, a large down pillow from the guest room. The classic tool of the coward. He wanted to smother her. He wanted to press the life out of her lungs while he looked away so he did not have to see her eyes. Paige stood on the other side of the bed. In her hand, the needle glinted silver. It was filled with a dark fluid, a lethal dose. Something fast, something permanent. "Do it," Paige hissed. "Do it, Tyrell. We do not have all day. That social worker will be back at 8. Tyrell looked down at his mother. For a second, I thought he might hesitate. I thought he might remember the woman who bandaged his knees and cheered at his baseball games. I thought he might find a scrap of humanity left in his soul. "I am sorry, Mom," he said, "but you are suffering. This is a mercy." It was the ultimate lie. He was not doing it for her. He was doing it for the money. He was doing it because he was weak and greedy and pathetic. He raised the pillow. He positioned it over her face. Ada turned her head, trying to avoid it, but the paralysis still held her mostly captive. She let out a small whimpering sound, a sound of pure terror that tore through my heart. "Hold her still," Tyrell ordered. Paige reached out, grabbing Ada's shoulders, pinning her down. "Just relax, Ita. It will be over soon. Just let go." Tyrell brought the pillow down. He pressed his weight onto it. He leaned over his mother, using his strength to snuff out her breath. I did not think. I did not plan. I reacted with the primal fury of a protector. I kicked the closet door open. It slammed against the wall with a bang that rivaled the thunder. Tyrell's head snapped up. He barely had time to register the shadow flying toward him. I roared. It was a sound I did not know I could make, a guttural, animalistic roar of 6 years of pain, 6 years of silence, 6 years of watching them torture the woman I loved. I raised the brass lamp high above my head. The cord whipped through the air like a lash. "No!" Paige screamed, letting go of Ida. Tyrell tried to turn. He tried to raise his hands to defend himself, but he was too slow. He was soft. He was slow. And I was a freight train of righteous anger. I swung the lamp with every ounce of strength in my 7 one-year-old body. I put my back into it. I put my soul into it. The heavy brass base connected with Tyrell's upper back right between the shoulder blades. There was a sickening crunch, the sound of bone giving way under metal. Tyrell screamed. It was a high, jagged sound of shock and agony. The air left his lungs in a rush. He arched his back, his arms flailing. He dropped the pillow. He collapsed forward, falling across Ada's legs. I did not stop. I grabbed him by the collar of his expensive shirt and hauled him off my wife. I threw him to the floor. He landed in a heap, groaning, clutching his back, writhing in pain. "Get away from her!" I bellowed, standing over him, the lamp raised for a second strike. "Get away from my wife!" Paige backed away, her flashlight shaking wildly, sending strobe lights across the room. "You," she shrieked. "You are supposed to be crazy. You are supposed to be asleep." I turned to face her, the lamp heavy in my hand. My chest was heaving. My blood was boiling. "I am not crazy, Paige," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "And I am not asleep. I have been awake for a long time, watching you, listening to you." She looked at the needle in her hand, then at me, then at the door. She was calculating. She realized the old man was not frail. She realized the game had changed. Tyrell moaned on the floor, trying to crawl away. "My back," he gasped. "You broke my back?" "Good," I spat. "Now you know what it feels like to be helpless." I stepped between them and Ada. I was the wall. I was the fortress. "You want to kill her?" I challenged Paige. "You have to go through me. And I promise you, girl, I will not make it easy." Paige's face twisted. The fear was gone, replaced by the desperation of a trapped rat. She raised the needle, pointing it at me like a knife. "Get out of my way, Moses," she hissed. "I have enough in here for both of you. I will drop you right here. I do not care anymore." She lunged. She came at me with the needle, aiming for my neck. She was faster than I expected, but she was sloppy. She was used to bullying victims who could not fight back. I sidestepped, swinging the lamp again, not to kill, but to disarm. The brass base hit her forearm. She cried out, dropping the syringe. It skittered across the floor, disappearing under the bed. She stumbled back, clutching her arm. "You old bastard," she screamed. The storm raged outside, but inside the room, the violence had just begun. Tyrell was trying to stand up, using the bed frame for support, his face pale and sweaty. Paige was looking for a weapon, looking for anything to finish the job. I stood my ground, the brass lamp in my hand, breathing hard. I knew this was not over. They were desperate. They were cornered. And they knew that if I walked out of this room, they were finished. "Come on," I said, tightening my grip on the lamp. "Come and get it." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in stark white light. For a second, we were frozen like a tableau of hatred. The son on the floor broken, the daughter-in-law cornered and vicious, the father standing guard, and the mother watching it all, her eyes wide and alive, witnessing the war for her life. Then the darkness returned, and the fight continued in the shadows. Tyrell was on the floor, clutching his broken back. His screams were swallowed by the roar of the thunder outside, but the threat was not neutralized. It had simply shifted form. Paige was no longer the composed real estate agent worried about her manicure. She was a cornered animal, and animals fight hardest when they are trapped. She did not run for the door. Instead, her eyes darted to the dresser, where Tyrell had left a box of packing supplies earlier that day. She lunged not for me, but for a heavy-duty box cutter sitting on top of a stack of bubble wrap. She snapped the blade out, the sound sharp and menacing in the small room. She turned on me, her face a mask of twisted rage, mascara running down her cheeks like war paint. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You stupid old man. You should have just died." She charged at me, leading with the blade. I was 71 years old, and I had just exerted a massive amount of energy taking down my son. My chest was heaving. My heart was fluttering dangerously. But 40 years on the loading docks had taught me how to keep my footing. I raised my left arm to block, protecting my neck and face. The blade slashed across my forearm, slicing through my shirt and biting deep into the flesh. The pain was immediate and searing, hot like fire running up my arm. Blood sprayed, warm and dark in the flashes of lightning, hitting the floor in thick drops. I grunted, stumbling back, but I did not fall. I grabbed her wrist with my good hand, squeezing with a grip forged by lifting crates and turning valves. She shrieked, trying to pull away, trying to slash me again, but I held on. She kicked my shins, her high heels digging into my bone. She spat in my face. "Let go," she hissed. "Let go, or I will cut your throat." She was younger than me, faster, and fueled by the desperation of a woman who knew her life was over if she lost this fight. We struggled in the center of the room, knocking over the nightstand, the lamp cord tangling around our legs. My strength was fading. The blood loss was making me dizzy. The room began to spin. Paige sensed my weakness. She threw her weight against me, pushing me backward toward the window. I felt my heel catch on the rug. I teetered on the edge of balance. If I fell, she would be on top of me in a second, and that blade would find my jugular. I needed help, but there was no one. Tyrell was useless, moaning on the floor, and the police were still minutes away. I was alone, or so I thought. Suddenly, there was movement from the bed. In the chaos, we had forgotten about Ada. We had forgotten about the woman we were fighting over. The woman who had been a statue for 6 years. But the saline had done its work. The poison was diluting, flushing out of her system with every beat of her terrified heart. I watched over Paige's shoulder as Ida's right arm, the one closest to the edge of the bed, twitched. It was a jerky, uncoordinated movement, like a marionette with tangled strings, but it was powerful. She lifted her hand, her fingers clawing at the air, searching. She found the heavy ceramic vase that sat on the bedside table. It was filled with stale water and dead flowers, the ones Paige had put there for show. Ada's fingers curled around the neck of the vase, her knuckles turning white. Paige did not see it. She was too focused on driving the box cutter into my chest. She did not see the arm rise behind her. She did not see the look of pure, motherly rage on Ada's face, a look that screamed, "Get away from my husband!" With a guttural cry that sounded like rusty hinges breaking open, Ada swung her arm. The vase connected with the back of Paige's head with a sickening thud. Ceramic shattered. Water and dead flowers exploded over us, showering Paige in a stinking mess. Paige stopped instantly, her eyes rolling back in her head. She went limp in my grasp, the box cutter slipping from her fingers and clattering to the floor. She slumped forward, her weight dragging me down. I caught her, easing her to the floor, pushing her off me. I looked at the bed. Ada was panting, her arm hanging off the mattress, trembling violently, but her eyes were locked on mine. And for the first time in 6 years, she smiled. It was a crooked, weak smile, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I did not waste time celebrating. I grabbed the roll of heavy-duty packing tape from the floor where it had fallen. I pulled Paige's hands behind her back and wrapped the tape around her wrists, layer after layer, until she was secure. I did the same with her ankles, binding them together tight. She groaned, shifting on the floor. But she was dazed. She was not going anywhere. I turned my attention to Tyrell. He had pulled himself up to a sitting position, leaning against the wall. His face was gray with pain. But when he saw Paige bound and unconscious on the floor, a new fear lit up his eyes. He looked at the door, then at me. He realized he was the last one standing. "Dad, please," he wheezed, holding his hands up in surrender. "I am hurt. I cannot move. Do not hit me again." I picked up the brass lamp base, my blood dripping onto the carpet, making a soft patter. I walked toward him. "You are not going anywhere, son," I said, my voice cold. "I am just going to make sure you stay put." Tyrell scrambled backward, pushing himself with his legs, trying to get to the door, trying to escape the judgment that was coming toward him. He was sobbing now, a pathetic, broken sound. "I didn't mean to," he cried. "It was her idea. She made me do it." I stood over him, looking down at the man I had raised, the man I had taught to fish, the man I had bailed out of trouble 1,000 times. I saw no son there. I saw only a stranger, a parasite. "Tell it to the judge," I said. Before I could do anything else, a blinding white light flooded the room from the window, followed by the crackle of a megaphone. "This is the police! Come out with your hands up!" I looked out the window through the rain. Blue and red lights were flashing, painting the wet lawn in chaotic colors. There were 4 cruisers blocking the driveway and a SWAT armored vehicle on the grass. Armed officers were taking positions behind the car doors, their weapons trained on the house. "Mr. Henderson," he had come through. I had signaled him earlier with the flashlight 3 short bursts from the bathroom window before the storm hit. He had called in the cavalry, just like he promised. I dropped the lamp. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I looked at Tyrell, who had frozen at the sound of the police siren, his face crumbling as the reality of his situation finally sank in. There was no running. There was no talking his way out of this. I walked over to the bed, my arm throbbing, my shirt soaked in blood and rain. I took Ita's hand. Her grip was weak, but it was there. She was holding me. "It is over, Ada," I whispered, leaning my forehead against hers. "We won." I heard the front door burst open, the sound of a battering ram splintering the wood. Heavy boots pounded down the hallway. Voices shouted, clearing rooms. "Police! Get on the ground!" I stayed right there, holding my wife's hand, waiting for the good guys to come and clean up the trash. I was tired. I was bleeding. And I was old. But as the first SWAT officer kicked open the bedroom door, his rifle raised, I stood up straight. "I am Moses King," I said clearly, raising my good hand. "Do not shoot. The victims are safe. The monsters are on the floor." The officer scanned the room, seeing the bound woman, the broken man, and the old couple holding hands. He lowered his weapon slightly, speaking into his radio. "Secure. We are secure. Send in the paramedics." I looked down at Paige, then at Tyrell, and finally back at Ada. The war was over. The long night was ending, and as the paramedics rushed in to tend to my wife, I knew that for the first time in 6 years, we were going to be okay. Because we had the one thing they tried to take from us. We had the truth. The interrogation room was cold and smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I sat on a metal chair, my hands resting on the table still stained with the blood from where Paige had cut me. Across the one-way mirror, I knew they were watching me. To them, I looked like a nightmare, a 7-1-year-old black man covered in blood, holding a wife who had supposedly been paralyzed for years. In the room next door, the door was open just enough for me to hear Paige. She was giving the performance of a lifetime. She was wrapped in a gray police blanket, shivering, clutching a cup of water with trembling hands. He just snapped. "Officer," she sobbed, her voice pitching up into a perfect register of terror. "We tried to help him. We really did. He has been battling dementia for months. He gets confused. He gets violent. Tonight he thought we were intruders. He attacked Tyrell with a lamp. He almost killed him." She blew her nose loudly. "I tried to stop him. I tried to take the weapon away, and he cut me. Look at my arm." The officer, a young man who looked too inexperienced for a homicide attempt, nodded sympathetically. "We have reports here from your husband about prior incidents, erratic behavior, wandering. Is that correct?" "Yes," Paige cried. "He disappears for hours. He talks to people who aren't there. We were going to put him in a care facility next week for his own safety. I think he knew. I think that is why he attacked us. He wanted to kill us so we couldn't put him away. It was a masterful lie." She took the truth and twisted it until it looked like madness. I sat there, listening to her weave a noose around my neck. The detective in my room, a weary-looking man named Miller, looked at me with pity and suspicion. "Mr. King," he said, tapping a file on the table. "Your son claims you have a history of violent outbursts. He says you assaulted him unprovoked while he was checking on your wife. We found you holding a heavy brass lamp, standing over him. That does not look good for you." "I was protecting her," I said, my voice calm. I did not have the energy to shout. They were trying to kill her. Detective Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. "Your daughter-in-law says you have paranoid delusions. She says you think everyone is trying to steal your money or hurt your wife. Do you see how this sounds to us, Moses? You have no proof. Just the word of an old man, against a young couple, with standing in the community." He was right. Without context, I looked like the aggressor. I looked like the crazy old man they said I was. Paige was winning. Even in handcuffs, even caught in the act, she was manipulating the narrative. She was counting on the system to see what it expected to see. A senile, violent man. "I need to make a phone call," I said. "You can call a lawyer," Miller said, "but I suggest you start cooperating. If your son presses charges, you are looking at aggravated assault, attempted murder." The door to the interrogation room slammed open. Detective Miller jumped up. "Hey, you cannot come in here. This is a restricted area." "Sit down, detective," a voice commanded, sharp, authoritative, and brooking no argument. "Ms. Sterling strode into the room. She was not wearing her social worker trench coat anymore. She was wearing a power suit that cost more than the detective's car, and she was carrying a leather briefcase. Behind her walked Dr. Evans, looking pale but determined, holding a medical cooler box. "Who are you?" Miller demanded. "I am Evelyn Sterling, attorney for Mr. Moses King," she said, slapping a business card onto the table. "And I advise you to stop questioning my client immediately, unless you want to be named in a civil rights lawsuit that will end your career before you qualify for a pension." She did not wait for a response. She placed a laptop on the table and opened it. "You are listening to the lies of a woman who just attempted a double homicide," Sterling said. Paige and Tyrell King are not victims. They are predators, and we have the receipts. This is highly irregular, Miller stammered. Watch, Sterling ordered. She hit the spacebar. The video from the hidden camera in the bedroom filled the screen. It was high definition. The audio was crisp. The detective leaned in, his eyes widening. He watched Paige enter the room. He watched her berate Ada. He heard the cruel, hateful words. "Why don't you just die? Nobody wants you here." And then the slap. The sound of Paige's hand hitting my wife's face echoed in the small interrogation room. It was brutal, undeniable. Miller recoiled. "Jesus." "Keep watching," Sterling said, cold as ice. The video jumped forward to the storm, the darkness, the flashlights, the conversation. "Do it, Tyrell. We do not have all day. I have enough in here for both of you." The confession was there. The intent was there, the pillow, the syringe. It was not the ranting of a senile old man. It was a recorded, premeditated murder attempt. Miller stood up slowly. He looked at me. The pity was gone, replaced by horror and respect. "They told us you were crazy," Miller whispered. "That was part of the plan," I said. "But that is not all." "Doctor." Evans stepped forward, placing the cooler on the table. "Detective. I am Dr. Samuel Evans. I have been treating Ada King. The family claimed she had a stroke 6 years ago. They claimed she was in a vegetative state." He opened the cooler and pulled out a sealed biohazard bag containing a lock of silver hair. "We ran a toxicology screen on Mrs. King's hair follicles," Dr. Evans explained, his voice clinical but shaking with suppressed emotion. "Hair grows about a centimeter a month. It keeps a record of everything in the bloodstream. This sample goes back years." He handed a report to the detective. "Positive for tubocurarine and pancuronium," Evans stated. "Consistently, daily, for 6 years. She was not paralyzed from the stroke, Detective. She was paralyzed by poison. They kept her frozen, a prisoner in her own body, conscious but unable to move, unable to scream. They dosed her every single morning to keep her quiet so they could live off her money." Detective Miller read the report. His hands were shaking. He dropped the file onto the table as if it were burning. 6 years, he muttered. "My God." He looked at the one-way mirror at the reflection of the room where Paige was still crying, still lying, still playing the victim. "Get 'em," Miller said to the uniform at the door. His voice was low, dangerous. "Get them both now." I stood up. I wanted to see it. We walked out into the hallway. The door to Paige's room opened. 2 officers walked in. They did not offer her a blanket this time. They did not offer her water. "Paige King," the officer said, pulling her up by her arm. "Stand up." "What is going on?" Paige asked, her eyes darting around. "Why are you being so rough? I am the victim here." "You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Moses and Ada King," the officer said, spinning her around and slamming her against the wall. "And for the torture and poisoning of a vulnerable adult." The handcuffs clicked. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "No!" Paige screamed. "You are making a mistake. It is the old man. He is lying. He is crazy." And they dragged her out into the hallway. She saw me standing there, flanked by my high-powered lawyer and the doctor she had threatened. She saw the laptop in Sterling's hand. Her face went white. The act dropped. The tears stopped. Her eyes went dead. She knew. She knew I had played her. She knew the old man she had underestimated had just destroyed her. "You," she hissed at me as they dragged her past. "You ruin everything." "I fixed everything," I replied calmly. Down the hall, they were bringing Tyrell out of the medical bay. He was in a wheelchair, handcuffed to the armrests. He looked broken, small. When he saw me, he started to cry, not the fake tears of his wife, but real tears of fear. "Dad," he blubbered. "Dad, tell them I didn't mean it. It was her. She made me do it." I looked at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had taught to be a man. I looked at him and I felt nothing. The love had been burned out of me, replaced by the cold clarity of justice. "You made your choice, son," I said. "You chose money over your mother. Now you can pay the bill." I watched them drag him away, his wails echoing off the linoleum. "Ms." Sterling put a hand on my shoulder. "It is done, Moses. We have them. They are never getting out." I nodded. I felt a great weight lift off my chest, a weight I had been carrying for 6 years without knowing it. The house was safe. The money was safe. But most importantly, Ada was safe. "Take me to my wife," I said to Dr. Evans. "She has been waiting long enough." I walked down the hall toward the intensive care unit, leaving the police to deal with the monsters. I had a life to rebuild, and I had a wife who needed to hear the sound of my voice, telling her that she was finally, truly free. The nightmare was over. It was time to wake up. The steel door of the interrogation room clanged shut behind me, with a sound that felt like a tomb ceiling. The room was stark and cold, smelling of industrial cleaner and old fear. Tyrell sat at the metal table, his hands cuffed to the steel ring bolted to the floor. When he saw me, he did not look like a man who had just tried to murder his parents. He looked like a terrified child who had broken a window and was desperate to avoid the belt. He surged forward as far as the chains would allow, the metal rattling violently against the table. His face was a mask of snot and tears, his eyes bloodshot and wide with panic. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Thank God you are here. You have to help me. You have to tell them." I stood near the door, keeping my distance. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find any trace of the son I had loved. I saw nothing but a stranger in an orange jumpsuit. "It was not me, Dad," Tyrell blubbered, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate torrent. "It was Paige. She is crazy. She is a witch. She manipulated me. She told me we had no choice. She said the loan sharks were going to kill us. She said they would cut off my fingers. I was scared, Dad. I was so scared." He was throwing his wife under the bus without a second of hesitation. The woman he had conspired with, the woman he had claimed to love, was now just a scapegoat for his own weakness. "I did not want to do it," he continued, his voice rising to a shriek. "I tried to stop her. I told her it was wrong, but she threatened to leave me. She said she would take everything. She forced me to hold the pillow. I did not want to hurt Mom. I swear on my life. Dad, I love Mom." He dropped to his knees, the chains pulling tight against his wrists. He shuffled forward on his knees, dragging the heavy chair with him, trying to get close to me. He tried to wrap his arms around my legs, but the chains stopped him short. He pressed his forehead against the dirty linoleum floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Dad, I am your son. You cannot let them put me in prison. I will die in there. You have to get me a lawyer, a real lawyer, not a public defender. Use the savings. Use the house. Do whatever you have to do. Just get me out of here. I will make it up to you. I will work. I will pay you back every cent. Just please, Dad, forgive me." I watched him grovel. I watched him beg, and I felt a cold, hard stone settle in my chest where my heart used to be. He was still doing it. Even now, facing life in prison, he was still trying to use me. He was still trying to spend my money to save his own skin. He did not care about what he had done to Ada. He only cared about the consequences. I took a step forward, my dress shoes clicking on the floor. Tyrell looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. He thought I was going to help him. He thought I was the same soft, foolish old man he had exploited for years. "Get up," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his sobbing like a razor. Tyrell scrambled back into his chair, wiping his face with his cuffed hands. "You will help me," he whispered. "You will get the lawyer." I did not answer. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out a folded document. It was heavy printed on thick bond paper. I smoothed it out on the metal table, placing it just out of his reach. Tyrell squinted at it, confused. "What is this? Is this the bail paperwork?" "No," I said calmly. "This is a balance sheet." He frowned, blinking away tears. "What?" "Read it, Tyrell." He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the lines of figures. I watched his face as he read. I watched the confusion turn to shock, and then to disbelief. "This says, $5 million, he whispered. "Cash assets liquid." "Keep reading," I said. He moved down the page. "Real estate holdings. Warehouse District A. Units 1 through 3. Commercial land value, $4 million. Total net worth, $9. $2 million? He looked up at me, his mouth hanging open. His brain was trying to process the information, trying to reconcile the numbers on the page with the father he thought he knew. "Dad, what is this? Whose money is this?" "It is mine, Tyrell," I said, adjusting my vest. "It has always been mine." "You?" he stammered. "But you worked at the warehouse. You drove a beat-up Buick. We lived in a regular house. I owned the warehouse, Tyrell," I corrected him. "I bought the land in the 80 seconds when nobody wanted it. I built the distribution center from the ground up. I leased it back to the logistics company. I made money while I slept. I made money while I worked. I made money while you were stealing $20 from my wallet. Tyrell's face went pale. You have $9 million. I did not live simply because I had to, I continued, my voice steady and cold. I lived simply because I wanted to. I wanted to raise a son who valued hard work. I wanted to raise a man who built his own life, not one who waited for a handout. Tyrell began to shake. His eyes darted back to the paper. $9 million. I was testing you, Tyrell, I said. For 10 years, I have been testing you. I had a trust fund set up. It was all drafted. The warehouses, the cash, the portfolio, it was all going to you. Tyrell let out a choked sound, like he had been punched in the gut. To me? All of it? Upon my death, I said, or when you turned 40 and showed me you were responsible. You were going to have everything. You would have been set for life. You could have bought 10 houses. You could have paid off your debts 1,000 times over. Tyrell stared at me, his eyes wide with horror. The realization was crashing down on him. He had not just committed a crime. He had committed the greatest act of self-sabotage in history. He had tried to kill his parents for a $2 million insurance payout when all he had to do was be a decent human being and wait, and he would have inherited $10 million. But you failed the test, I said. You failed it in the most spectacular, disgusting way possible. You chose greed. You chose cruelty. You chose to poison the woman who gave you life. Dad, no wait, he stammered, reaching for the paper as if he could absorb the money through his fingertips. We can start over. I can change. I did not know. If I had known. If you had known, I interrupted, you would have just killed us sooner. You would have pushed us down the stairs 5 years ago instead of poisoning Ada. I snatched the paper back from the table and folded it neatly, tucking it back into my pocket. That money is gone, Tyrell, I said. As far as you are concerned, it never existed. What are you going to do with it? He whispered, tears streaming down his face again. I'm going to spend it, I said. I am going to hire the best, most vicious prosecutors in the state to assist the district attorney. I am going to hire private investigators to dig up every dirty thing you and Paige have ever done. I am going to spend every single dime of my fortune to ensure that you get the maximum sentence allowed by law. Tyrell recoiled as if I had slapped him. You cannot do that. I am your son. I have no son, I said. My son died a long time ago. I only have a failed investment, and I am liquidating my assets. I turned to the door. Dad! Tyrell screamed, lurching against the chains. Dad, please do not leave me here. Look at all that money. We can be happy. We can go anywhere. I will leave Paige. I will do whatever you want. I stopped at the door and looked back at him one last time. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had traded his soul for fool's gold. You are going to rot in here, Tyrell, I said. And every night when you are lying on that metal cot staring at the ceiling, I want you to think about the $9 million. I want you to think about the warehouses. I want you to think about the life you could have had if you had just loved your mother. I knocked on the steel door. The guard opened it. Dad! Tyrell howled, a sound of pure animal despair. It echoed off the concrete walls, a requiem for a wasted life. I walked out into the hallway, and the heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt lighter. The money I had hoarded, the money I had hidden, finally had a purpose. It was not for retirement. It was not for luxury. It was for justice. I walked toward the exit where Ms. Sterling was waiting for me. Is it done? She asked. It is done, I replied. Burn him. We walked out of the police station and into the bright, clean sunlight. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. I had a wife to heal. I had a life to live. And I had a fortune to spend on making sure the monsters never hurt anyone ever again. The air in the rehabilitation center smelled of lavender and expensive floor wax, a sharp contrast to the sterile metallic scent of the hospital trauma unit. 3 months had passed since the storm. This was the best facility in the state, a place where senators sent their wives and football stars recovered from injuries. It cost $10,000 a week. I paid it without blinking. I would have paid $10 million. Ada was sitting in a specialized chair by the window, watching the birds in the feeder. Her face was fuller now. The gray pallor of the poison was gone, replaced by the warm brown tone I had fallen in love with 50 years ago. She turned when I walked in. Her movements were still slow, deliberate, like she was operating a heavy machine, but they were hers. She was driving the machine again. Moses, she said. The word was rough, like gravel grinding together. Her vocal cords were scarred from disuse and the toxic chemical burns of the paralytic. but to me, it sounded like a choir of angels. "I am here, baby," I said, walking over and kissing her cheek. "I brought you peaches." She smiled, the left side of her mouth lagging slightly behind the right. "Good," she rasped. "Hungry." She was eating solids again. She was learning to hold a spoon. Every day was a victory, but every victory was shadowed by the terrible knowledge of why she had to relearn these things. The doctor said her muscles would recover. They said she might even walk again with a cane. But they could not fix the other part, the part that woke us up at 3:00 the morning. That night, I stayed in the guest cot next to her bed. At 2 a.m., the screaming started. It was not a loud scream. It was a whimpering, gasping sound, the sound of someone suffocating. I was at her side in a heartbeat. "Ada, Ada, wake up. It is a dream." Her eyes flew open wide and unseeing. She was thrashing her hands, clawing at the air, pushing away an invisible pillow. "No," she sobbed. "Tyrell, no, please." My heart broke into 1,000 jagged pieces. She was back there. She was back in the dark bedroom with her son looming over her, pressing the life out of her. She was not remembering an accident. She was remembering her murder. I gathered her in my arms, rocking her back and forth. "He is gone, Ada. He is in jail. He can never hurt you again. I promise. I promise." She clung to my shirt, weeping like a child. "My baby," she whispered. "My baby boy." Why? There was no answer to that. There was no logic that could explain why a son would kill his mother for money. It was a hole in the universe, a darkness that swallowed all reason. I held her until she fell back asleep, exhausted by her grief. As I watched her sleep, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. We could not go back to that house. The house in Atlanta, the house where I raised Tyrell, the house where Paige had walked around like a queen. It was poisoned. Every wall, every floorboard, held the memory of their betrayal. The next morning, while Ada was in physical therapy, I called a realtor, not the one Paige used. A shark I found online who specialized in quick cash sales. "I want it sold," I told him, "as is furniture included, everything inside. I do not want to step foot in it again. We can get a great price, Mr. King," the realtor gushed. "The market is hot. I do not care about the price," I said. "Just get rid of it." But before I signed the papers, I had one last thing to do. I drove to the house one last time. It felt like walking into a crime scene. The police tape was gone, but the air felt heavy. I walked through the rooms. I went into Tyrell's office. I went into the guest room Paige had used as a closet. I started grabbing things, not valuable things. Personal things. Tyrell's bowling trophies. The framed diploma I had been so proud of. Paige's designer coats. The photo albums from their wedding. I dragged it all out to the backyard, to the fire pit we used for barbecues. I piled it high, a mountain of memories. A monument to a wasted life. I doused it in lighter fluid. The smell was sharp and cleansing. I struck a match and threw it onto the pile. The fire roared to life, hungry and bright. I watched the faces of my son and daughter-in-law curl and blacken in the heat. I watched the trophies melt. I watched the expensive clothes turn to ash. I stood there for an hour, feeding the fire, burning the past until there was nothing left but gray dust. I did not feel sad. I felt lighter. I was cauterizing the wound. I got back in my car and drove away without looking back. The house sold 3 days later to a developer who planned to tear it down. Good riddance. Now I needed a new future. I needed a place where Ada could heal, really heal. I remembered a story she used to tell me when we were dating. She grew up near Savannah in a small town near the coast. She talked about a white house with a wraparound porch and old oak trees draped in Spanish moss. She talked about the smell of the salt marsh in the morning. She said it was the only place she had ever felt truly safe. Her parents had sold the house 40 years ago. It was a long shot, but I had $9 million and a very good lawyer. I called Miss Sterling. "Find it," I said. "The breathless cottage on Tybee Island. Find out who owns it. Buy it. I do not care what it costs. Make them an offer they cannot refuse." It took her 2 days. The owners were an elderly couple looking to downsize. They were happy to sell. I hired a contractor. I told him I needed the house renovated in 2 weeks. I wanted ramps. I wanted a state-of-the-art bathroom. I wanted a kitchen where a wheelchair could move freely. I offered him triple his normal rate if he finished on time. He hired 3 crews and worked around the clock. Then I hired the staff. I was done being the only caregiver. I was done being tired. I hired 2 private nurses, kind women with strong backs and gentle hands to cover the days and nights. I hired a chef, a man who specialized in southern cooking, to make sure Ada ate like a queen every day to regain her strength. 3 weeks later, Ada was discharged. I picked her up in a new van, a luxury model with a hydraulic lift and leather seats. She looked nervous. She thought we were going back to Atlanta. She thought we were going back to the scene of the crime. Where? She asked, looking out the window as we hit the highway heading south. Home, I said. The real home. She slept most of the way. When she woke up, we were crossing the bridge onto the island. The smell of the ocean filled the car. Her eyes widened. She sat up straighter. We pulled into the driveway. The house was gleaming white in the afternoon sun. The oak trees were there, majestic and ancient. The porch was wide and welcoming. Ada gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Mama's house, she whispered. My house. Your house, I confirmed. I bought it back. It is yours, Ada. Forever. I parked the van. The nurses came out to help. We got her into her chair and wheeled her up the new ramp. We took her through the front door. The house smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers. The chef was in the kitchen, and the smell of shrimp and grits wafted down the hall. We wheeled her out to the back porch, which overlooked the marsh. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The crickets were singing. It was peaceful. It was safe. Ada looked at me. Tears were streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. These were tears of joy, tears of relief. Thank you, she choked out, reaching for my hand. Moses, thank you. I told you I would take care of you, I said, kneeling beside her chair. I am sorry it took me so long to get it right, but I am here now, and I am not going anywhere. She squeezed my hand. Her grip was getting stronger every day. No Tyrell, she asked, looking at the door with a flicker of fear. No Tyrell, I said firmly. He is gone. He can never find us here. This is a fortress. Ada, a fortress built on love. And nobody gets in unless we invite them. She relaxed. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, breathing in the salt air. She was home. I stood up and looked out at the water. I had spent a fortune. I had burned bridges. I had destroyed my own son. But looking at my wife, safe and smiling for the first time in a decade, I knew I had made the best investment of my life. But the war was not completely over. There was one last battle to fight. The sentencing hearing was next week, and Tyrell and Paige were going to learn that even from 300 miles away, Moses King casts a very long shadow. The courtroom was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had haunted my home for 6 years. That silence had been heavy with fear and secrets. This silence was heavy with judgment. I sat in the front row, wearing my best suit, with Miss Sterling beside me. Ada was not there. I would not let her see her son in chains. I would not let her see the monster he had become. Tyrell and Paige sat at the defense table. They were not sitting together. They were separated by their lawyers, separated by their hatred, separated by the lies they had told to save themselves. Tyrell looked like a ghost. He had lost 20 pounds in jail. His suit hung off him. He kept looking back at me, his eyes pleading, begging for a salvation that was never coming. Paige sat rigid. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. She knew the game was over. The evidence was overwhelming. The videos, the recordings, the hair follicle tests, the forged documents. It was a mountain of proof that no lawyer could climb. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing, shuffled her papers. She looked at the defendants. She looked at the jury, who had returned a guilty verdict in less than 2 hours. Tyrell King, she said, her voice ringing off the mahogany walls. For the crimes of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud, I sentence you to 40 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole until you serve 85% of your sentence. Tyrell let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He slumped forward, his head hitting the table. 40 years. He would be an old man when he got out, if he got out. He had traded his life for a gamble he lost. The judge turned to Paige. And you, Paige King? The evidence shows you were the architect of this nightmare. You procured the poison. You administered the doses. You manipulated a family for profit. For these crimes, and for the additional charges of possession of a controlled, lethal substance with intent to distribute, I sentence you to 45 years. Paige did not scream. She did not cry. She simply closed her eyes. The bailiffs moved in. They hauled Tyrell to his feet. He turned to me one last time. "Dad!" he shouted, the word tearing from his throat. I am sorry, Dad. I did not look away. I watched him. I watched the son I raised, the son I loved being dragged away to pay for his sins. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, but it was not for him. It was for the little boy who used to run into my arms when I came home from work. That boy was dead. The man in the chains was a stranger. They took Paige next. She walked with her head high, but as she passed me, she faltered. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear. Real, deep fear. She realized that her beauty, her charm, her lies, none of it mattered anymore. She was just a number now. The doors closed. They were gone. It was over. Miss. Sterling squeezed my hand. Justice is served, Moses. I nodded. Yes, it is served. But it does not fix the past. It only clears the way for the future. I left the courthouse and drove straight to the airport. My private plane was waiting. No, actually I took a commercial flight, first class. I was rich, but I was still Moses King. I still liked to keep things simple. When I landed in Savannah, the air was thick and sweet. I drove the rental car over the bridge to Tybee Island. The sun was shining. The marsh grass was waving in the wind. It was a good day. I pulled into the driveway of the white cottage. The ramp I had installed gleamed in the sunlight. I walked inside. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. The nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. She is on the back porch, Sarah said, smiling. She wanted to see the sunset. I walked out to the porch. Ada was there, sitting in her chair, a light blanket over her legs. She was looking out at the garden. I had hired a landscaper to plant roses, dozens of them, red, pink, yellow, white. They were in full bloom, their scent mixing with the salt air. I walked over and stood beside her. I did not say anything at first. I just put my hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered my hand with hers. Her grip was firm, warm, alive. "The roses are beautiful," she said. Her voice was getting stronger every day. The rasp was fading. "I planted them for you," I said. "One for every day we lost." She turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were clear. The shadow of the poison was gone. She looked at me with a love so fierce it took my breath away. She lifted her hand from mine. She reached up her arm, trembling slightly but holding steady. She touched my cheek. Her fingers traced the line of my jaw, the gray stubble on my chin. She took a deep breath. She focused. She wanted to say something important. "Thank you," she said, each word distinct and deliberate. "Thank you, my hero." I felt my knees go weak. I knelt beside her chair, burying my face in her lap. I cried. I cried for the 6 years of silence. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the relief. "I am not a hero, Ada," I whispered into her dress. "I am just a man who loves his wife." She stroked my hair. "You saved me," she said. "You came back for me." We sat there until the sun went down, watching the sky turn from blue to purple to black. We listened to the ocean. We smelled the roses. We were old. We were scarred. But we were together and we were free. I looked at the empty chair beside us. It was waiting for a friend. Maybe Mr. Henderson would come visit next week. I had sent him a plane ticket. He deserved a vacation. I stood up and turned Ada's chair around. "Come on, baby," I said. "Let us go inside." Sarah made gumbo. I pushed her into the warm, lighted house, leaving the dark behind us forever. "Now, I want to talk to you, the person listening to this story. You might think this is just a drama. You might think this could never happen to you. You might think that family is sacred and blood is thicker than water. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Blood is just a liquid. It can be spilled. It can be poisoned. Family is not about DNA. Family is about who shows up when you are broken. Family is about who protects you when you cannot protect yourself. I spent 45 years building a life, building a fortune, thinking I was doing it for my son. I thought money would secure his future. Instead, it corrupted his soul. Greed is a sickness. It rots people from the inside out. It turns children against parents. It turns wives against husbands. Do not ever assume you are safe just because you are loved. Watch the signs. Listen to the whispers. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you are being underestimated, where people think you are weak or old or foolish, use it. Let them think you are helpless. Let them get comfortable. Let them make mistakes. Because the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone overlooks. I am Moses King. I am 71 years old. I have $9 million in the bank. I have a wife who loves me. And I have a life that is finally my own. I won the chess game because I was willing to sacrifice my pawns to save my queen. If you suspect someone you love is being taken advantage of, do not wait. Do not be polite. Ask the hard questions. Install the cameras. Call the lawyers. Fight. Because if you do not, no one else will. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe that justice was served, hit that like button. If you believe that money can turn people into monsters, share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven your son, or would you have done exactly what I did? I am going to go eat gumbo with my wife now. I earned it. Stay safe out there, and never, ever give up. This ordeal taught me a brutal truth. The most dangerous enemies are often the ones sleeping under your roof. I spent years believing that unconditional love would yield loyalty. But I learned that greed is a cancer that rots even the strongest bloodlines. Real family is not defined by a last name, but by who stands beside you when you are broken. Never make yourself small to fit someone else's narrative. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not forgiveness, but justice. Protecting my wife required me to lose a son, but in doing so, I regained my life. If you believe that justice was finally served, hit that like button and tell me in the comments. Would you have forgiven your son, or would you have done exactly what I did?